Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving deep into the smell of burning parchment. You're standing in a medieval town square, and the air is thick with the smoke of centuries. It's not wood smoke from a hearth. It's the acrid, greasy smell of burning leather bindings, the dry sting of blazing vellum. It's the smell of knowledge being systematically erased, a bonfire not of wood, but of ideas. You're watching the entire collected wisdom of a generation, their history, their science, their poetry, being tossed onto a pyre by men who believe they are doing God's work. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this. You'd be the one in the back quietly asking, "But why are we burning the astronomy section?" And that would be the end of you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're all listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the heat on your face. The crowd is either cheering or watching in silent terror, and it's hard to tell which is worse. This isn't a rare event. This is policy. This is how the medieval world, from the ashes of Rome to the spires of Constantinople, often performed its housekeeping. You see a book tossed onto the flames, its meticulously hand-painted cover curling and blackening in an instant. That's a year of a scribe's life gone in a second. That's a philosophy passed down from a forgotten Greek master, now just ash on the wind. This is what we call theological sanitation. It's the act of cleaning house by destroying any idea that doesn't fit the current, approved narrative. And the approved narrative in medieval Europe and much of the Byzantine Empire was incredibly specific. If a text contained a slightly different take on the nature of Christ, if it referenced a council that was later declared heretical, or if it just felt a bit too pagan, it was a fire hazard. Not just a hazard to the soul, but a political one. You watch as a set of scrolls is brought forward. These aren't even Bibles. They might be medical texts, observations of the stars, or local histories. But the bishop has declared them tainted. Maybe the author was excommunicated, or maybe, just maybe, the local ruler owed the author's family money, and this was a convenient way to erase the debt and look pious doing it. Book burning is an effective, if smelly, way to win an argument by default. We often think of the Great Library of Alexandria as the poster child for lost knowledge, but its destruction was a long, slow process over centuries. What you're watching in this medieval square is something more acute, more deliberate. It's a surgical strike. Think of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. When the Crusaders sacked the mighty city of Constantinople, they didn't just steal the gold, they burned the libraries. They melted down priceless bronze statues, and they used illuminated manuscripts, books so beautiful they were considered treasures of heaven, as kindling for their cooking fires. Historians still argue whether this was an act of barbaric, anti-intellectual rage or a calculated destruction of a culture they envied. Either way, the result was the same. Texts that had survived the fall of Rome were lost forever in the fires set by fellow Christians. This is the great filter of history. We only have what survived. And survival wasn't about being the most profound, the most accurate, or the most beautiful. Survival was about being in the right place, at the right time, and most importantly, being approved by the right people. And sometimes the reasons for destruction were almost comical if they weren't so tragic. A quirky but true tidbit. Sometimes texts were burned simply because of a bad translation. Imagine a scholar translates a sensitive Greek philosophical text into Latin, but he gets a key term wrong. He writes, "The universe is eternal" instead of "the universe was divinely created." Suddenly that text isn't just a translation error, it's a heretical document challenging the very nature of God. And poof, onto the fire it goes, along with all the translator's other, perfectly fine work. It's like getting your entire online presence deleted because you made one bad tweet. Except, with more fire. You shuffle your feet, the cobblestone's hot even through your shoes. The smoke stings your eyes. What you're witnessing is the creation of a void. This is why we have lost works. The plays of Sophocles we only have titles for. The histories of the Roman Republic we only have summaries of. The Gospels that are only mentioned in other surviving Gospels. They didn't just gently fade away. They were pushed, tossed, and fed to the flames. This was the rule. From Spain to Syria, if your texts weren't the right texts, they were fuel. The dominant powers of the medieval world were engaged in a centuries-long campaign to streamline thought. It was a massive, decentralized effort to curate the past, to ensure that all roads of inquiry led to the same, pre-approved destination. And as you stand there, watching the last embers of a priceless philosophical treatise float up into the night sky, you have to assume this is happening everywhere. You assume that this fire, this great culling of ideas, is universal. The idea that somewhere a kingdom could exist that simply missed the memo. A kingdom that was collecting, copying, and preserving these very texts, not as heresy but as sacred wisdom. That possibility doesn't even enter your mind. It would be like imagining someone today is still using stone tablets. It's unthinkable. The air begins to cool and the crowd thins. All that's left is a smoldering pile of black, brittle pages and the lingering, awful smell. This is the scent of control. The scent of a history being rewritten by subtraction. That smell of control, the scent of burning history, is what you're taking with you. You're walking away from the smoldering pile, but you're not heading home. You're ascending. You're moving from the street to the palace, from the town square to the throne room, because you need to understand why. This isn't just random, chaotic vandalism. The Great Culling was a top-down executive order, authorized and encouraged by the very people whose faces were stamped on the coins. You need to understand that the people lighting these fires, the emperors and the popes, didn't think they were villains. They thought they were heroes. You're standing in a Roman basilica, but it's not a church yet, it's a hall of power. Emperor Constantine, the man who made Christianity the empire's new brand, is presiding. It's the 4th century, and the Arian controversy is raging. The debate? The very nature of Christ. Arius, a priest, has been teaching that Christ, the Son, was created by God the Father and was therefore subordinate to him. To the other side, led by Athanasius, this is a soul-destroying heresy. They argue Christ is consubstantial with the Father, of the same substance, and co-eternal. To you, this might sound like arguing over the finer details of a movie's lore. But to Constantine, this is a political disaster. You can't have one empire, one God, if everyone is fighting about what that God is. A divided faith is a divided empire, and a divided empire is a weak one. So he calls the Council of Nicaea. The debate is settled, mostly. The Nicene Creed is written, and Arius is condemned. And what happens to his books? Constantine orders them burned. He doesn't just suggest it, he makes it an imperial edict. Anyone found hiding an Arian text instead of turning it over for destruction will be put to death. This is the why. It's theological necessity married to political reality. A book, in this worldview, isn't just a collection of ideas. It is a vessel. A sacred text is a vessel for divine truth. A heretical text, therefore, is a vessel for a spiritual plague. It's not just misinformation. It's a disease that can infect you, corrupt your soul, and guarantee your eternal damnation. You don't argue with a plague, you eradicate it. You don't debate with a demon, you exorcise it. And you don't file a heretical book in a restricted section, you burn it. It's the only way to be sure. You're not just an emperor, you're a celestial content moderator with a zero-tolerance policy and a really big torch. Now you move forward in time. You're in the court of Charlemagne, around 800 AD. He's built a sprawling, fragile empire across Western Europe, and he has the same problem as Constantine. His subjects in Saxony speak a different language than his subjects in Italy. They use different currencies, different laws, and, most dangerously, different liturgies. They're all Christian, but their Bibles are full of regional variations. Their chants are different. Their prayers are in corrupted Latin. Charlemagne, a brilliant and ruthless administrator, sees this chaos and decides to fix it. He initiates the Carolingian Renaissance, a massive educational reform designed to standardize everything. He wants one new, clean, legible script, Carolingian minuscule, which you're indirectly reading right now. He wants one standardized version of the Latin Bible. He wants one unified Roman rite for all his churches. What does this mean? It means all those old books, the local Gallican texts in France or the Visigothic texts in Spain, are now officially obsolete. They are incorrect. And what do you do with incorrect, outdated software? You delete it. In this case, Deleting often meant scraping. Parchment was expensive, so they would take an old, incorrect liturgical book, scrape the wrong text off the surface, and write the new, correct Roman text over it. Or if it was too worn or too heretical, it was simply discarded or burned. This wasn't always malicious. Historians still argue whether these obsolete texts were intentionally suppressed to cement centralized power, or simply fell out of use and were recycled for their parchment due to a lack of interest. The result, however, is the same: another generation of texts lost. This is the Great Culling. It's a tidying up of history, a purification of the faith, and it's incredibly effective. The popes in Rome issued lists. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, though that came later, the idea was ancient, of books that were simply forbidden. Local bishops had their own, smaller-scale bonfires. The Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century wasn't just a military campaign against the Cathars in southern France. It was a campaign of total cultural erasure, which included the meticulous burning of every text associated with their dualist faith. It's the ultimate unfriending medieval style. You don't just block a heretic, you delete their entire comment history, their profile, and the server they were hosted on. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even the people making the rules played fast and loose. Charlemagne himself, in the Libri Carolini, wrote a blistering critique of the Second Council of Nicaea, which had dealt with the use of icons. He essentially corrected the Pope's own position, believing the Pope's translators had bungled the Greek and were leading the West into idolatry. It shows that everyone believed they had the pure, correct version of the truth, and everyone else's version was dangerous, flammable garbage. So you see, the flames you smelled in that town square were not the result of ignorance. They were the result of a terrible, unwavering certainty. The certainty that you are right, that your truth is the only truth, and that it is your sacred duty to protect humanity from all other versions of it. This pruning of the tree of knowledge was a multi-generational, state-sponsored, divinely mandated project. And it was working. That terrible, unwavering certainty you just witnessed in the emperor's court, it has a price. And the price is this: a void, a silence. You're standing in that silence now. It's not a cozy, comfortable silence. It's an empty, echoing one. It's the sound of a library with all its books gone, the sound of a conversation with 1,000 missing replies. This is what happens when a book dies. We use that term, lost work, but it's too clean, too sterile. It sounds like you just misplaced your keys. This is different. A book dying isn't misplacing one copy. It's the systematic or accidental eradication of every copy. It's the moment when the last person who read it dies, and the last vellum page it was written on is scraped clean, burned for fuel or eaten by rats. It's the point of no return. It's when an entire lineage of thought, a multi-generational human endeavor, hits a permanent, irreversible 404 error. You're standing in a phantom library, the Library of the Lost. Over there is the section for Roman history. You see the historian Livy. He wrote a monumental history of Rome, Ab Urbe Condita, in 142 books. We have 35. That's it. You're holding a menu for a feast, but 80% of the dishes are no longer available. What was in those missing 107 books? The details of the Second Punic War, the conquest of Greece, crucial parts of the story. Gone. We have the summaries, the cliff notes written by later authors, but that's like trying to understand Moby Dick by reading its back cover blurb. You walk over to the philosophy section. Where is Aristotle's second book of Poetics? The one that was all about comedy. We have the first book on tragedy, which shaped Western literature for millennia. The sequel, the one that might have given us a framework for humor and satire, is gone. A persistent rumor, popularized by fiction, is that it was suppressed by humorless monks who felt laughter was unholy. The truth is likely more boring. It was probably just considered less important, copied less, and then the last few copies just decayed. And that's the thing. Not all loss is a dramatic bonfire like the one you saw. Sometimes the culling is just neglect. You're in a monastery scriptorium. A monk is holding two books. One is a commentary on the Psalms by a respected church father. The other is a dusty, brittle papyrus roll of plays by the Greek master Sophocles. He only wrote about 120 plays. We have 7. The monk looks at the old, flaking pagan text. He needs parchment for a new book, an important book. Parchment is expensive. It's the skin of an animal, scraped and treated for weeks. You don't just buy more. So he takes an old, unimportant text, maybe a Roman legal treatise or a Greek romance, and he gets to work. He soaks it. He scrubs it. He scrapes the ink off with a knife, erasing the useless text to create a blank slate for the useful one. This is a palimpsest. And this is how a book dies to give another one life. It's the medieval version of taping over your wedding video with the Super Bowl. It's recycling, but with a catastrophic cost to history. Here's the quirky tidbit. Sometimes these textual ghosts haunt us. Centuries later, using multispectral imaging, we can read the erased text hiding underneath the new one. The famous Archimedes palimpsest, for example, hid unknown works by the great mathematician beneath a 13th century prayer book. The book didn't die completely, it was just in a textual coma, waiting for the right technology to wake it up. But for most, there was no waking up. The texts were simply gone. Historians still argue whether this was a catastrophic loss of irreplaceable genius or if it was just the greatest hit surviving. Did we lose the ancient equivalent of forgotten B-side tracks? Or did we lose foundational pillars of human thought? Were these texts lost? Or were they discarded by a medieval society that, by consensus, found them irrelevant or dangerous? Either way, the result is the same. The past we have is not the past. It is a past. It's the past that survived the shipwreck. Imagine all of ancient literature as a massive fleet of ships. A storm hits, the fall of Rome. Pirates attack, the burnings, and the ships just get old and leak, neglect. What we have today is just the handful of broken crates and waterlogged barrels that washed up on the shore of the modern world. We look at this random collection of flotsam and try to reconstruct the entire fleet. This is the great, terrifying fragility of knowledge. It's why your entire sense of the medieval world is one of control, fire, and erasure. You have to assume this was the global standard. This was just how the world worked. The idea that a culture could exist, simultaneously Christian yet completely isolated from this entire system of Roman and Byzantine control, a culture that didn't get the memo to burn its books. That's not just unlikely. It's impossible. You're standing in the ruins of that phantom library, the silence of the lost books ringing in your ears. It is, you think, a total, unrecoverable loss. That silence of the phantom library is absolute, isn't it? It feels like an endpoint. You're standing in the ashes of the medieval European mind, and the verdict seems final. What's lost is lost forever. The great culling, whether by fire or by neglect, has done its job. The past has been curated, streamlined, and sanitized. You accept this. This is the reality of your world. But you're in a port city now, maybe Venice or Genoa. The air smells of salt, spices, and something else. Distance. This is a synapse of the world, where cargo and rumors are unloaded in equal measure. A sailor, his skin burned dark by a sun you've never seen, is telling a story in a tavern. He's speaking to a merchant who's speaking to a scribe, who's writing a letter to a bishop. The story is fragmented, fantastical, and utterly mad. It's a whisper from the south, a whisper of a kingdom that shouldn't exist. Not a collection of heathens or infidels, but a Christian empire, an ancient Christian empire, hidden from the world, sealed off by the vast impassable deserts of Nubia, and the Muslim wall that since the 7th century has stretched from the Red Sea to the Atlantic, cutting your world, Latin Christendom, off from everything beyond it. They say this kingdom is an island of faith in a sea of unbelievers. They say its kings are descended directly from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. They say it's ruled by a priest-king, a mythical figure who would ignite the European imagination. Prester John. This is the great mainstream historical fact of the era, the legend of Prester John. For centuries, popes and emperors in Europe were utterly obsessed with finding this man. He was the ultimate what-if, a Christian ally who they dreamed would ride out from the east or the south, they weren't sure, and help them defeat their enemies, retake Jerusalem, and win the game. A letter, almost certainly a forgery, even circulated through Europe in the 12th century, supposedly from Prester John himself. And this letter, this is your quirky tidbit. It was the medieval equivalent of a viral social media post. In it, Prester John describes his kingdom as a land of wonders, a river of gems, a fountain of youth, a mirror you can look into to see every corner of your kingdom. He claims to have ants that dig up gold, and yes, he casually mentions that his lands are home to tame lions, elephants, and even dragons. It's pure, uncut fantasy. But here's the thing about desperate people. They want to believe in fantasy. And medieval Europe was desperate. Historians still argue whether the Prester John legend was a complete fabrication, a projection of European hopes onto the blank spaces of the map, or if it was a kernel of truth, rumors of Nestorian Christians in Asia, or perhaps the Coptic Christians of Egypt, that got twisted and magnified by 1,000 retellings. Eventually, though, the rumor settles. The compass needle that was wildly spinning pointing to India or Central Asia finally locks onto one place, Africa, specifically the high, inaccessible mountains of Ethiopia. It's the only place that remotely fits the description. It's Christian, it's ancient, and most importantly, it's isolated. Now you have to understand what isolated means in this context. It's not just hard to get to. It's textually quarantined. When the great Islamic expansions of the 7th and 8th centuries redrew the map of the world, Ethiopia's connection to Rome and Constantinople was severed. Completely, they were cut off from the rest of Christendom. You, a scholar in your cold, damp European monastery, suddenly realized the implication. If they were cut off, they missed the memos. All of them. They missed the specific papal bulls that condemned certain books. They missed the Carolingian reforms that standardized the Bible and declared all other local versions corrupt. They missed the Byzantine councils that fine-tuned theology and, in the process, declared centuries of earlier thought heretical. They missed the great fires, the great cullings, the entire multi-generational project of theological sanitation that you've been breathing the smoke of. They've been running on a different operating system, a version of Christianity that branched off before the great software updates and purges. You look at the forged Prester John letter in your hand, with its absurd tales of gold-digging ants. You've always laughed at it. But now, you're not looking at the fantasy. You're looking at the grain of truth it might be wrapped around. What if this kingdom isn't rich in gold but in parchment? What if their libraries aren't curated and sanitized? What if they're full? What if they kept the books that everyone else burned? What if, on a dusty shelf in a mountain monastery, a scribe is right now copying a text that the rest of the world has declared lost for 1,000 years? The whisper from the south is no longer just a rumor about a king. It's a rumor about a library. A library that time, and the fires, forgot. The idea is intoxicating. It's a second chance. It's the textual equivalent of finding a lost world. That intoxicating idea, that rumor of a library that time forgot, is pulling you. You've left the salt spray of the Venetian tavern and the whispers of Prester John. You are moving south, following that rumor to its source. And the source is not a city. It's a fortress. But it's not a fortress built by men. It's a fortress built by God, or by geology, which in the ancient world was the same thing. You are climbing. The air is getting thin, sharp, and cold, even though you are near the equator. The sun is a different kind of sun up here. It feels closer, more intense, baking the rock under your feet, even as the wind makes you shiver. You've left the choking, humid heat of the Red Sea coast far below. You are ascending into the Ethiopian highlands, the roof of Africa. This is not the Africa of the European imagination. This is not a flat, sandy desert or a tangled jungle. This is a vast, high-altitude plateau averaging over 6,000 feet, suddenly and violently interrupted by canyons and cliffs that make the Grand Canyon look like a polite ditch. The world up here is vertical. It's a land of basalt foundations, ancient volcanic plugs, and sheer precipices. And then you see them. The ambas. This is the word you need to know. An amba is a mountain, but it's a specific kind. It's a mountain with a flat top like a giant's table, but with sides that are completely, utterly sheer. They rise from the plateau like stone exclamation points, thousands of feet straight up. They are natural fortresses and they are the key to everything. In Europe, a fortress is something you build. You pile up stones, you dig a moat. It costs a fortune, it takes a century, and it's a constant hungry drain on resources. Here, the fortresses are just here. They were provided by the landscape. All you have to do is climb one, pull up the ladder, and you are impregnable. This is the natural library vault. You're looking at a monastery, but it doesn't look like a European one. It's not nestled in a gentle valley. It's perched on the flat, isolated summit of an amba. The monastery of Debre Damo, for instance, a real place, has been sitting on its flat-topped mountain since the 6th century. Its sides are sheer drops of over 80 feet. How do you get up? You get hauled up. On a single rope, a plaited leather ladder, operated by the monks above. Now imagine you are a 13th century invading army, or even a 10th century local warlord, or a 15th century bishop's envoy with a new list of banned books. You arrive at the base of Debre Damo. You look up. The monks are looking down. What's your plan? You can't use a battering ram. You can't set fire to a sheer cliff face. You can't lay siege. The monastery on top has its own water cisterns and grain stores. You can yell. That's about it. You can stand at the bottom and yell about heresy until you get hoarse and the altitude sickness gives you a pounding headache. This is the security system. While European libraries were being sacked in cities like Rome and Constantinople, or located in monasteries on open land that were easy targets, the Ethiopian libraries were sitting on these stone islands in the sky. To burn a book here, you'd first have to be a professional mountaineer, and the monks naturally aren't going to let down the rope to the guy holding a torch and a burn list. This geography didn't just protect from invaders, it protected from the climate. Parchment's worst enemy, the thing that turns it into a pulpy, unreadable mess, is humidity, mold. The lowlands are full of it, but up here on the high plateau the air is cool and, most importantly, dry. It's a natural dehumidifier. The climate itself is a preservative, keeping the brana, the animal skin pages, dry, crisp, and legible for centuries. This isolation was so profound that the ambas were used for more than just monasteries. Here's your quirky tidbit. For centuries, the Ethiopian emperors used the ambas as royal prisons. When a new emperor came to the throne, he would retire his brothers, uncles, and any potential male rivals to the crown to a remote amba, like the one at Weni. They weren't killed. They just lived out their lives on this inescapable mountaintop prison, preventing any succession crises or civil wars. It tells you everything you need to know about these places. They were a one-way trip. Easy to get into, impossible to leave without an invitation, a perfect vault. So, when a scribe carried a precious text to a monastery on an amba, he wasn't just taking it to a safe place, he was taking it to a geological safe deposit box. Historians still argue whether this isolation was a deliberate policy of the Ethiopian kings, a fortress mentality, or simply a byproduct of their challenging geography. Did they intentionally wall themselves off from the world, or did the world just find it too hard to bother them? Either way, the result was the same. The great fires, the culling, the theological sanitation that was raging through the rest of the medieval world. The memo never got here. It couldn't get up the rope. This entire highland is a textual sanctuary. The mountains themselves are the guardians. This is the place where books came to not die. This is the Ark. And now you need to see who built it. You're standing on that high, windswept amba, looking down from the geological fortress. You understand how the books were kept safe. The sheer cliffs, the dry air, the isolation. It's the perfect vault. But a vault is just an empty box until you put something valuable in it. Why build a vault at all? What was so precious that it needed to be hauled up a rope to a stone island in the sky? The answer, of course, is faith. The geology was the safe, the conversion was the treasure. To understand that, you have to leave the 13th century monastery and travel backwards in time. Way back. You're in the 4th century now, around 330 AD. You're not on the cold high plateau. You're down in the heat, at the sprawling cosmopolitan port of Adulis on the Red Sea coast. This is the gateway to the powerful kingdom of Aksum, a major player in the ancient world, a trading hub that connects Rome, Persia, and India. The air smells of salt, frankincense, and the dust of 1,000 caravans. A ship has just come into port, or perhaps been wrecked nearby. It's a Roman ship from Tyre in Syria, and on it are 2 young Syrian boys, brothers, named Frumentius and Aedesius. They are educated from a good family and Christian, but on this day their luck has run out. The ship is attacked by locals, or perhaps it was a simple shipwreck, the details are hazy, and the entire crew is massacred. Only the 2 boys are spared, and they are taken as slaves to the capital city, to the court of the king of Axum. This is the mainstream historical fact that changes everything. It's the accidental pebble that starts the avalanche. The king, Ella Amida, sees that these are not ordinary slaves. Frumentius, in particular, is brilliant. He's educated in Greek, he understands philosophy, he understands how the Roman Empire, their main trading partner, thinks. He rises from cupbearer to secretary to eventually the kingdom's treasurer. He becomes indispensable. Then the king dies. His son Ezana is just an infant. The queen mother, as regent, begs Frumentius, this trusted, intelligent foreigner, to stay and tutor the young prince to help her run the kingdom until Ezana comes of age. Frumentius agrees. You are now watching one of the most effective and quietest religious takeovers in history. Frumentius, a devout Christian, has the ear of the prince and the trust of the queen. He uses his position to encourage other Christian merchants in the port cities to practice their faith openly. He helps them build chapels. He is, for all intents and purposes, the shadow pastor of the entire kingdom, and he is teaching the future king Ezana all about this new, powerful faith. When Ezana finally takes the throne, he does something revolutionary. He declares Christianity the official religion of the kingdom of Axum. This is not a minor event. This is happening at the exact same time that Emperor Constantine is doing the same thing in Rome. Christianity is going viral in the 4th century, and Axum is an early and enthusiastic adopter. But this is where the path diverges. Frumentius knows this new church needs structure. It needs priests, it needs bishops. So he travels to the great center of Christian thought in his part of the world. Not Rome, not Constantinople, but Alexandria in Egypt. He goes to see the most powerful, most famous, and most controversial bishop of the era, Athanasius the Great. Yes, the same Athanasius who was the chief opponent of Arius at the Council of Nicaea, the debate you saw Constantine trying to quash with his book-burning edict. Frumentius tells Athanasius, I have this new kingdom, this Christian king, they need a bishop. Athanasius listens, and in a move of brilliant political and theological insight, he essentially says, Congratulations, you're it. He anoints Frumentius as the first bishop of Ethiopia, giving him the name Abba Salama, the Father of Peace. This is the moment that defines the next 1,700 years. The Ethiopian Church is now, officially, a daughter church of the Coptic Patriarchate of Alexandria. Its spiritual DNA is Coptic, Egyptian, Alexandrian. It will look to Alexandria for its theology, its structure, and crucially, its books. It is not Latin. It is not Byzantine Greek. It is something else entirely. It has just been plugged into a different textual tradition, a different lineage of thought than the one that will dominate Europe. Here's your quirky tidbit. King Ezana's conversion is etched in stone and metal. We have the Ezana stone, a trilingual inscription, like a Rosetta Stone for Ge'ez, Greek, and Sabaean, where he boasts of his conquests, first in the name of the traditional pagan gods of heaven and earth. But we also have his coins. The early coins of his reign show the crescent and disk, symbols of the old gods. Then, suddenly, the design changes. The pagan symbols are gone, replaced by the Christian cross. Ezana was one of the first kings in the entire world, right alongside Rome, to put the cross on his currency. It was a public relations campaign, a rebranding of the empire, stamped on every piece of gold. Historians still argue whether Ezana's conversion was a profound personal spiritual awakening or a brilliant geopolitical move. By aligning with the Christian faith, he was making Axum an equal partner with the newly Christian Roman Empire, his main economic and military ally. Was it a move of the heart or a move of the head? We'll probably never know. but the result is the same. The Ark of the Ambas now has its purpose. The kingdom has a new faith, and this faith is based on the book. They need Bibles. They need liturgies, commentaries, lives of saints. They need them in their own language. And because their father church is in Alexandria, they're about to get a lot of books, and some of them are going to be very, very different from the ones Rome will eventually decide to keep. The great work of copying is about to begin. The great work of copying has begun. You've seen the vault, the Amba. You've seen the treasure, the new Christian faith imported from Alexandria. But a new faith and a strong vault aren't enough to create a unique textual tradition. You need one more ingredient: a story. You need a national epic, a foundational myth so powerful that it makes preserving your history, your specific version of history, a matter of national and spiritual survival. You're no longer in the 4th century. You've leaped forward to the 13th or 14th century. The kingdom of Aksum is a memory, and a new dynasty, the Solomonic dynasty, has taken power. To legitimize their rule, they have embraced, sponsored, and perhaps even commissioned the most important book in Ethiopian history, a book that is not in the Bible, but for many is just as important. You are watching a scribe write the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings. This book is the mainstream historical fact that defines Ethiopian identity. It is a sprawling, epic narrative that weaves together history, allegory, and a healthy dose of pure invention. And it tells a story. It tells the story of Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. The Bible, you'll remember, just has a brief, almost businesslike account of her visit to King Solomon. She comes, she's impressed by his wisdom, they exchange gifts, and she goes home. That's it. The Kebra Nagast looks at that story and sees the galaxy-sized hole in the middle. Gifts, it asks. She's a beautiful, powerful queen. He's the wisest, richest king in the world. What kind of gifts do you think they exchanged? And with that, the book gives you the answer. The Kebra Nagast tells you that Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, their queen from Ethiopia, traveled to Jerusalem. She and Solomon fell in love, or at least he tricked her into sleeping with him. It's a complicated story. And when she returned to her kingdom, she was pregnant. She gives birth to a son, Menelik, the first emperor of Ethiopia. When Menelik grows up, he travels to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon, overjoyed, rolls out the red carpet. He educates him, showers him with honors, and then begs him to stay and rule Israel after him. But Menelik says no. His destiny, his kingdom, is in the south. Solomon, heartbroken, agrees, but on one condition. Menelik must take with him the firstborn sons of all the high priests and elders of Israel. He wants to create a new sister Israel in Ethiopia. The high priests are furious, but they can't defy the king. Their sons, however, are even more furious. They are being exiled from their home, from the center of the universe, from the temple, from the Ark of the Covenant. So, in the night, before they leave, the young men, led by the son of the high priest Zadok, do the unthinkable. They steal the Ark of the Covenant, not a copy, not a replacement. The Ark, the one with the 10 Commandments, the one that holds the very presence of God. And here's the kicker. They tell Menelik, and he's horrified, but they get away with it. They travel south, protected by the Ark's divine power, all the way back to Ethiopia, where, the Kebra Nagast tells you, it remains hidden and protected to this very day in a small chapel in the city of Aksum. Now stop. Think about what this story does. If you believe this, if this is your national history, you are not just another Christian kingdom. You are not a daughter church of Alexandria. You are the true Israel. You are God's new chosen people. The glory of Israel, the very presence of God, left Jerusalem, which would soon be defiled and conquered, and came to you for safekeeping. Your kings are not just kings. They are Solomonic, the direct line descendants of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Your priests are not just priests. They are Levitical, descendants of the firstborn sons of the temple. And your books? Your books are not just books. They are the sacred, vital records of the one true, unbroken faith. You are not just preserving texts. You are the divinely appointed guardians of the Ark itself. Historians still argue whether the Kebra Nagast was the result of a long oral tradition finally written down, or a masterstroke of political propaganda crafted by the new dynasty to cement its claim to the throne and sever its junior status to the Coptic Church in Alexandria. Either way, this story changes the entire psychology of preservation. It's not a dusty academic exercise. It's a sacred national duty. You don't clean house and burn old books. You don't update your theology. You are the guardians of the original deposit of faith. You don't get memos from Rome or Constantinople. You are the source. And here's your quirky tidbit, which shows how deep this belief runs. To this very day, the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Church claims to have the Ark of the Covenant. It is supposedly kept in the chapel of the tablet at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. No one is allowed to see it, except one single virgin monk, the guardian of the Ark, who is chosen for life. He never leaves the chapel grounds. He is the only human being allowed to look upon it. When he dies, a new guardian is chosen. This is not a metaphor. This is not a symbol. This is their profound, literal, historical claim. When you believe that you are guarding the actual physical Ark of the Covenant, suddenly the idea of hauling a few extra books up a rope to a remote amba doesn't seem like a lot of trouble. It's just part of the job. You are in that sacred high-altitude scriptorium. The monk, the Detera, has unrolled a manuscript. You're leaning in. You've accepted the vault of the Amba, and you've understood the motive of the Kebra Nagast, the divine duty to guard the Ark and the true faith. But now you are looking at the text itself, the actual physical words on the page. And they look like nothing you've ever seen. It's not the familiar Latin alphabet of Rome. It's not the graceful, flowing Greek of Constantinople. It's not even the Coptic script from their mother church in Alexandria, which is itself a modified version of Greek. This is something else entirely. The letters are angular, elegant, and complex. They look like architectural drawings, like a beautiful, intricate code. You are looking at Ge'ez. This is the Ge'ez cipher, and it is perhaps the most important lock on the entire vault. This is the linguistic firewall that made the Ethiopian textual tradition truly inaccessible to outside meddling. Here is the mainstream historical fact that you need to grasp. Ge'ez, the language, is ancient, a Semitic language from the same family as Hebrew and Arabic, and its original script was an abjad. That means it was all consonants. You'd write KTB to write, and the reader would just know from context to read it as Kataba, Yiktub, or Kutub. He wrote, he writes books. It's like writing TXT MSSG and your brain just fills in the vowels. But then, right around the 4th century, the exact moment Frumentius and King Ezana were bringing in Christianity, the script underwent a radical evolution. It ceased to be an abjad and became an abugida. This is the crucial part. An abugida is a system where each character is not just a consonant, but a consonant vowel syllable. The base shape of the letter is the consonant, let's say K, but then it's modified in small, consistent ways to show the vowel that follows. A little tick on the right might make it K. A loop at the bottom might make it KU. A different tick might make it Kai. You are looking at a page of it, and you see the pattern. It's not separate vowels like A, E, I, O, U. It's a complete, pre-packaged phonetic set. It's like every letter comes with its own little non-negotiable vowel meal. Now, why is this a firewall? Because this system is profoundly incompatible with the languages and scripts of the rest of Christendom. Latin and Greek are alphabetic. Their vowels are independent letters. To translate a Greek text, a scribe in Rome could, if he was lazy, just transliterate it, write the Greek word using Latin letters. It was messy, but it created a hybrid text, a door that could be pushed open. You can't do that with Ge'ez. You can't transliterate a Greek or Latin word. The systems don't match. The underlying logic is as different as a gear in a circuit board. To bring a text from Greek or Coptic into Ge'ez, you have to do a full translation. A deep, meaningful, root and branch transplant. You have to completely dissolve the original text and recast it, reforge it, in the sacred shape of Ge'ez. This makes the Ethiopian textual world a closed garden. It's the medieval equivalent of having an Apple device in a world of DOS-based PCs. The files just won't open. Imagine you're Charlemagne's envoy. the one trying to standardize the Bible. You've traveled all this way. You've climbed the rope up the Amba and you're not happy about it. And you've brought your new, correct, standardized Latin Vulgate. You present it to the Detera. He looks at your book. He looks at his own. Your book is written in a script he can't read in a language he's never heard, with a structure that is totally alien to him. He looks back at you, points to his Gaz Bible, and says, through a translator, "This is the Word of God. I don't know what that thing you have is, but it is not holy. Now please enjoy the long rope ride down." The firewall worked. The constant updates, reforms, and standardizations that were causing so much textual destruction in Europe just bounced off. The memos from the popes, the edicts from the Byzantine emperors, they never arrived. And if they had, they would have been, quite literally, unreadable. Historians still argue whether this profound change from an abjad to an abugida was a purely internal, natural linguistic evolution, or if it was a deliberate theological project spurred by the translation of the Bible. Was it the scribes themselves who realized they needed a better system, a more precise system to capture the sacred sounds of the Greek scriptures without error, and so they invented one? It's a fascinating chicken and egg problem. And for your quirky tidbit, the firewall isn't just in the writing, it's in the sound. Ge'ez, which is no longer a spoken language but a liturgical one like Latin, is full of ejective consonants. These are sounds, common in Ethiopian languages, that simply don't exist in European or most other Semitic languages. They are made by compressing air in the back of your throat and releasing it in a sharp pop, like P-T-K. It's a sound that sounds like you're about to start a beatbox track, but it's actually a sacred syllable. This means that even if a Roman or Greek priest tried to learn and say the Ge'ez liturgy, he would sound wrong. Horribly wrong. It's a built-in phonetic lock. The very language itself resists foreign influence. So the Ge'ez cipher is complete. It's a script that's incompatible. It's a sound that's unpronounceable. This is the final layer of the vault. The Amba is the stone. The Kebra Nagast is the motive. And Ge'ez is the code that ensures the treasure inside remains not only safe, but pure. The Ge'ez cipher is complete. You've seen how the language itself in its script and its sound is a fortress. It's a closed garden that keeps the sacred texts pure and unpolluted by outside influence. Now, you're going to see the physical building that was constructed to house that garden. You are going to a place where the architecture is the vault. You're traveling south from Aksum, moving through the 12th century. The world has changed. The old capital is no longer the center of power. Jerusalem, the city of Solomon, has been captured by Saladin. Christian pilgrims can no longer go. The connection to the Holy Land is severed, and the new king, a devout man from the Zagwe dynasty, King Lalibela, decides to do something utterly audacious. He decides that if his people cannot go to Jerusalem, he will bring Jerusalem to them. He will build a new Jerusalem here, in the Ethiopian highlands. You arrive at a town, but it seems unremarkable. Just a collection of round huts on a high, rolling plain. You're told this is the place. You see no cathedrals, no spires, no grand domes. There are no city walls. It feels like a trick. The wind just blows over the grassy highlands. Then your guide leads you to a rift in the rock, a kind of trench. You walk to the edge, and you look down. You are not looking at a building. You are looking at the roof of a building, a roof that is level with the ground you are standing on. You are looking at a church that has been carved, not built, but excavated, from a single solid piece of volcanic basalt. This is Lalibela. This is the mainstream historical fact that defies belief. It's not a collection of churches. It's a collection of colossal sculptures that you can walk inside. There are 11 of them here, connected by subterranean tunnels, trenches, and passages. To enter the holiest site, Bieta Georgis, the Church of St. George, you first walk into a deep cross-shaped trench and then you see it. A perfect monolithic tower 40 feet high, emerging from the earth's embrace, carved from the inside out. This is a fortress. This is the most brilliant fortress you've seen yet. Remember the Amba? That was a geological fortress, a natural defense. This is an architectural fortress, but its defense is stealth. An invading army, a theological sanitation squad, could ride right past this town and see nothing. The churches are invisible from even a short distance. They are sunk into the earth, their roofs flush with the plateau. You cannot burn what you cannot find. You cannot sack a city that doesn't appear to exist. You walk down the stone-cut steps, descending into the cool, dark earth. The sun vanishes. The wind stops. The temperature drops 20 degrees. You're in a courtyard that is 40 feet below ground. The walls are the living rock. You pass through a doorway, also carved from the rock, into the church itself. Inside, it is not dark. Light filters in from cross-shaped windows high up, also carved. The entire space, the pillars, the arches, the altar, the floor, is one single piece of stone. Nothing was brought in. The builders were not masons. They were sculptors. They didn't build up, they carved down. And the sound. You hear a priest, a dedera, chanting. The sound of the sacred ejective Ge'ez consonants you remember. But here, in this solid rock chamber, the sound doesn't dissipate. It's amplified. It's absorbed and reflected by the dense stone, creating an acoustic environment that is unlike anything on earth. It's not an echo. It's a resonance. The church itself has been tuned to the sound of the liturgy. It is a fortress designed not just to protect the books, but to protect the sound of the books. Here is the quirky and beautiful tidbit. How were these built? The human labor involved is staggering, almost impossible for the 12th century. The local tradition gives you the answer. King Lalibela was taken to heaven in a vision, where he was shown the designs for the churches by God. He was told to build them. So he gathered his craftsmen and they worked by day. But at night, the tradition says, a second, silent, and far more efficient team of workers showed up. Angels. The angels would arrive at dusk, and they would do twice as much work as the humans had done all day, carving the stone with, presumably, holy, laser-like precision. Historians still argue whether this New Jerusalem was a purely symbolic act of piety, or a desperate, brilliant political move to recenter the kingdom's faith and power after the loss of the Old Jerusalem. And of course they argue about how they were built. Some have posited on the absolute fringe that their design hints at influence from the Knights Templar, who were active in the Holy Land at this exact moment and whose own circular churches had a unique design. But the angelic story feels more fitting. You're standing in Beit Medhain Alem, the largest of the churches, a massive 36-foot-high hall of 72 pillars, all one piece of stone. This is not just a building, it's a statement. It is a bunker for the faith. It's an ark like Noah's, but in reverse. Built not to float on the water, but to sink into the earth to ride out the flood of history, the fires of war, and the storms of heresy in the cool, silent, and indestructible embrace of the living rock. You're standing in that subterranean church at Lalibela, the sound of the Ge'ez liturgy resonating in your very bones, the air cool and still. The church itself is a fortress of living rock, a bunker sunk into the earth to protect the faith. But what, exactly, is it protecting? It's protecting him. In the corner, sitting on a low stool, is the detera, the scribe, and on his lap is the treasure. A book. A massive leather-bound volume. You've seen the vault and now you're looking at the gold. But before that book was a book, before it was even a collection of pages, it was an animal. It was a goat, or a calf, or a sheep, grazing on the high-altitude grasses of the plateau, probably just outside the very town you're in. To understand the book, you have to start with the goat. You're outside now, away from the sacred silence of the church. You're in a monastery's workshop and the smell is, well, it's rough. It's the smell of a tannery. It's the rank, chemical and animal smell of process. This is where the sacred page is born, and its birth is not a clean antiseptic affair. This is the craft of the parchment maker. You're watching a monk, his robes hitched up, working over a series of vats and frames. This is the creation of brana, the unique Ethiopian form of parchment. It starts with the animal. The animal is ritually slaughtered, its life taken with respect, but its contribution has only just begun. The skin is flayed carefully to avoid any nicks or cuts that would ruin the final page. You are now holding a raw, bloody, and floppy hide. What do? First, you wash it. You get the blood and the dirt off. Then it goes into a vat for a long, disgusting bath. This isn't water, it's an alkaline solution. In Europe, they used lime. Here, it might be a mixture of ashes and water or whatever the local traditional alkali is. The skin soaks in this soup for days, maybe even a week. The purpose? To loosen the hair and break down the fats. The vat is bubbling and the smell, let's just say it's not frankincense. It's the kind of smell that would have you, our modern-day friend, inventing the iPad 2,000 years early, just to avoid it. After its long, putrid soak, the skin is pulled out, it's slimy and swollen. The monk throws it over a curved wooden beam. He takes a large, blunt, two-handled scraping knife, and he scrapes. He leans into it, putting his whole body weight behind it, and in long, wet, schlooping strokes, the hair and epidermis just slide off in a disgusting mat. This is hard physical work. It's not the gentle, scholarly life you imagined, but that's only one side. He flips the skin over. This is the fleshing side. He takes a different, sharper knife and scrapes off all the remaining bits of fat, muscle, and membrane. He is trying to get down to the pure central layer of the skin, the dermis. Now you have a wet, naked, pale white skin. It's clean, but it's not a page. If you let it dry now, it would just shrivel up into a hard, useless shoe leather hockey puck. The magic, the part that turns skin into parchment, is the next step. The monk takes the wet skin and stretches it as taut as a drumhead, on a large square wooden frame. He ties it at dozens of points around the edge. It's now suspended in the air, and as it dries over several days, it fights to shrink, but the frame won't let it. This tension, this battle between the skin's nature and the frame's will is what does it. It permanently, fundamentally realigns the collagen fibers, changing the skin's structure from a random, leathery mat into a smooth, strong, opaque writing surface. While it's stretched, the work isn't over. The monk comes back again and again with a special crescent-shaped knife called a lunellum. He scrapes the surface as it dries, shaving it ever thinner, opening the pores, making it more uniform. Finally, after days of drying and scraping, it's cut from the frame. You're holding it now. It's not a floppy skin. It's a single, large, tough, creamy white sheet. It's Brana. It's still not ready. It's smooth, but not that smooth. The monk takes a piece of pumice stone, that light, airy volcanic rock you find all over this highland, and he pounces it, dusting it and rubbing the surface to create a microscopic velvety tooth, a perfect texture that will grab the ink and hold it, preventing it from bleeding. This entire process for one skin, which might only make 4 pages of a large book, could take weeks. This is the mainstream fact of parchment making. It is a slow, smelly, exhausting, and incredibly skilled craft. Here's your quirky tidbit. Modern scientists, looking at these ancient manuscripts under a microscope, can often still see the pattern of the hair follicles. The follicle pattern of a goat is different from a calf, which is different from a sheep. They can read the animal, the age of the animal, and sometimes, by analyzing the DNA, even determine if the animal was related to others used in the same book, suggesting a single, local flock. The page is a witness, a biological echo of the life it came from. Historians still argue whether the specific Ethiopian Brana method was a purely indigenous tradition, developed in isolation on the plateau, or if it was heavily influenced by the Coptic monastic traditions that came from Alexandria in the 4th and 5th centuries. The truth is probably a mix, a hybrid technology, but the result is a parchment that is distinctly tough, resilient, and perfectly suited to its highland home. You look at the single, finished, pumiced page. It's beautiful. It's cost a goat its life, and a monk a week of hard, smelly labor. And a single Bible, a large one, might require 150 to 200 animals, an entire herd. You are not just holding a page, you are holding a herd of goats. You're holding a king's ransom. This is why books were not information. They were treasures, on par with gold and jewels. This is why they were kept in the rock-hewn vaults of Lalibela, or hauled up the ropes of an amba. The sheer physical cost of the paper was astronomical. It's a good thing they didn't have to pay for printer ink cartridges too, or the whole project would have been scrapped. Now this perfect, costly, velvety, smooth page is ready. It's waiting. It has a purpose. It's waiting for the word of God. Awaiting, continue. You are holding that single, perfect, costly page of Brianna. It's a herd of goats, a week of labor, all reduced to a creamy, velvety, smooth sheet. It's waiting. It's a vessel. You're back in the monastery, maybe in the deep, quiet bunker of Lalibela, or maybe in a hut on the high, windy amba of Debre Damo. The smell of the tannery is gone, replaced by something dry, something sweet. It's the smell of ink. You are sitting with the Datera, the scribe, but he is more than a scribe. In Europe, a scribe might be a hired professional, a copyist. The Datera is a different kind of figure. He is a scholar, a singer, a poet, a musician, and, according to some, a sorcerer. He is one of the most educated, and for the average villager, most feared and respected men in the kingdom. And for him, what he is about to do is not writing. It is not transcription. It is an act of prayer. You watch him prepare. He doesn't just grab a pen and start. First, he makes his ink. He takes a piece of charcoal from a specific, preferred type of wood and grinds it into the finest, blackest powder. He mixes this with a binder, a gum, and water. The result is a deep, rich, matte black ink that will chemically bond with the brana. For his other color, the one that will be used for the sacred names of God, for chapter headings, for punctuation, he does the same with a different mineral. He grinds up iron oxide, a red orange ochre, to create the vibrant, earthy red that you will see coloring every single manuscript. He doesn't have a pen in the way you think of one. He has a piece of reed, a calamus. He has cut it himself, dried it, and then, with a sharp knife, he has carved the tip to a very specific broad-edged point. This simple, handmade tool is what will give the angular architectural Ge'ez script its distinctive thick and thin rhythm. Now, he lays the brana on a board. He takes a dull silver point and a ruler, a piece of wood, and he rules the page. He presses hard, creating a grid of invisible embossed lines. This isn't just for keeping the lines straight. This is an act of ordering creation. It's building the scaffolding, the house into which the holy word will be placed. It's the mainstream historical fact of all manuscript production. The page is ruled first. But here it feels more like a ritual. He's ready. He dips the calamus into the black ink. He whispers a prayer, and he touches the pen to the page. What comes out is not a rushed scrawl. It is a slow, deliberate, painted script. Each Ge'ez character is formed with multiple, careful strokes. He is not writing words. He is building them. He is an architect of the alphabet. This is why a single Deptera, working alone, might take an entire year to copy one gospel. A complete Bible? That could be the work of a lifetime, and it would be a lifetime of devotion. He would fast. He would pray. He would perform the liturgy. The copying was the liturgy. Here is the central belief. To make a mistake, to misspell a word in the holy text, was not just a typo. It was a sin. It was a failure of your duty, a blemish on your soul. So the work was slow, methodical, and obsessive. This, of course, leads to your quirky tidbit. The Datera were human, and obsessive, devout humans under pressure make interesting mistakes. They're not sins, but they're fascinating. Look closely at the page he's writing. At the very edge of the margin, you might see a tiny, tiny little note, almost invisible. It might be a single Ge'ez word. What is it? It's a correction. Later, another monk will proofread the Datera's work. If he finds a missing word, he can't just write it in. That would ruin the beautiful uniform lines. So he writes the missing word in the margin. And to show where it's supposed to go, he draws an elaborate little symbol, a dlet, from the J's word for delete or remove, but here used as insert. It looks like a little decorative bird, or a flower, or a complex knot. One bird is placed in the text where the word is missing, and the matching bird is placed in the margin next to the word. It's the most beautiful, reverent system of track changes you could ever imagine. And what if the scribe just got bored, or tired, or just felt a little cheeky? In the margins of European manuscripts, you famously find all sorts of weird, unrelated doodles. Knights fighting snails, complaining monks, rude drawings. But in these sacred Ge'ez texts, it's much rarer. The margins are kept clean. But sometimes, in the decoration in the harag, the elaborate knotted designs that separate chapters, you might see the scribe's personality. A little bird, a human face, a lion, hidden in the geometric knotwork. It's the artist, the human, just peeking through the divine work. Historians still argue whether the Deutera were a continuation of the Levite priesthood from the Kebra Nagast legend, a kind of secret class of hereditary scholars, or if they were simply a product of the monasteries. Were they a caste, or just a job? Their ambiguous, powerful role in Ethiopian society, part priest, part scholar, part white magic practitioner, is a source of endless fascination. You watch the Deutera work. The sun moves across the sky. He has filled one page. It has taken him hours. It is perfect. Every letter is a black jewel, every sacred name a drop of red earth. It is a work of art. It is an act of worship. It is a prayer, written in ink and patience, and it cost a fortune. That one perfect page you're admiring, the one that took hours to create and cost a fraction of a goat's life. Now, multiply it. Multiply it by 400. Multiply it by 500. You're standing up, and the Deutera is showing you the finished product. A complete Bible. Or perhaps one of the massive illuminated gospel books known as a Gara Gospel. It's a monster. It's a tome so large and heavy it takes 2 hands to lift. It might contain over 200 brana folios, which, since they are folded in half to make 4 pages, means 800 or more pages. You do the math. At 1 animal for every 4 pages, that's 200 animals. An entire massive herd of goats or calves gone. It's the equivalent of a modern-day rancher deciding to liquidate their entire stock, not for cash, but for 1 book. This is the price. This is the mainstream historical fact that grounds all the spiritual devotion in cold, hard economics. A single, complete Ethiopian Bible in Ge'ez on Brana represented a concentration of wealth that is almost impossible for us, in our world of 99-cent e-books, to comprehend. This wasn't a book. This was an economic event. This was a piece of infrastructure. The cost in today's terms would be well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even millions if you factor in the years of skilled, irreplaceable Deutera labor on top of the raw materials. You, as a 14th century peasant farmer, would never own this. You would never even touch this. You might, if you were lucky, see it once a year at Easter, held aloft by a priest. This book cost more than your village. It cost more than your entire bloodline would earn in a century. This is why they were guarded. This is why they were hauled up 40-foot ropes to an Amba fortress. They weren't just guarding the word of God. They were guarding a vault of gold. The book was the gold. It was a treasury asset. An invading army would steal a book like this for the same reason they'd steal a king's crown. Not necessarily to read it, though some did, but to ransom it or to strip it for its parts. This, naturally, leads to who could afford such a thing. Not you. Not the Deutera himself. These books were commissioned. They were the ultimate Kickstarter projects, but the only backers were royalty, high-ranking nobles, or the great ancient monasteries themselves, which were vast economic engines. This gives us our quirky tidbit, the colophon. At the very end of the book, after the last sacred word, the scribe would often add a personal note, and this note is where you find the receipt. It would say, "This book was copied by the hand of the sinner, scribe's name. May God forgive his sins. And it was commissioned by the noble and glorious king's name, and his queen's name. May God remember their piety and grant them long life." It's a spiritual invoice. It's a public, permanent record that says, I paid for this. God, you saw me pay for this. Everyone, you see I paid for this. It's piety, yes, but it's also a demonstration of power and wealth so profound it's hard to miss. It's the medieval equivalent of getting your name on the side of a university library. And sometimes, the outside was just as lavish as the inside. The book would be bound in wooden boards, but those boards would then be covered in hammered silver, gold or brass, and studded with precious gems and icons. The cover itself was a treasure chest, literally. Historians still argue whether this astronomical cost was a barrier to the faith's spread or a feature of its preservation. Did the high price mean that only a few correct versions could be made, thus limiting textual drift and error? Or was it an act of conspicuous piety, a holy arms race where nobles and monasteries competed to see who could commission the most beautiful, most expensive, most golden gospel book as a public display of their devotion, and not incidentally their tax-free income? You're looking at this book. It's a fortress. It's a herd of goats. It's a year of a man's life. It's a king's ransom. It is, in every conceivable way, one of the most valuable objects in the entire kingdom. It's an economic, spiritual, and political atom bomb, all bound in one leather-covered package. And a library, a monastery, might have dozens of these. Now you understand why the Amba has a rope. Now you understand why the churches are buried in the ground. You're not just protecting ideas. You're protecting a treasury. You're looking at this priceless, kingly treasure. A single book that is worth a herd of 200 animals. A man's entire life of work. It's an economic atom bomb, bound in leather and wood. It's stored in a vault of living rock, or hauled up a sheer cliff face to a mountaintop fortress. It is by all measures safe. But the greatest threats to this book aren't the ones with swords. An invading army is a rare, spectacular event. The real enemies are the ones that are already inside the fortress. They are silent, they are patient, and they are always, always hungry. You are now going to war, a slow-motion war, against the scribes' worst non-human enemies. The first and most powerful is an enemy you can't even see. It's the air, or more specifically, the water in the air. You're in a monastery, but it's not a dry, high-altitude one. It's a rainy season, or maybe this monastery is in a valley, near a lake. The air is thick, wet, and heavy. You can feel the humidity on your skin. And the brana, the animal skin page, can feel it too. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Parchment is hygroscopic. That's a fancy word, but it's a simple, terrifying concept. It means the page breathes. It actively absorbs moisture from the air. And when it does, it's no longer a dry, strong page. It gets limp, it gets soft, and it becomes a buffet. You're looking at a page and it's covered in spots, small rusted or black-brown freckles. This is foxing. But over here on this other page, it's worse. It's a fuzzy black and green bloom that looks like a tiny cursed forest. This is mold. The brana, made of animal collagen, and the ink, made with a gum binder, are organic. They are food. The mold spores, which are everywhere all the time, land on this now damp, delicious page, and they begin to feast. They eat the ink right off the surface. They eat the brana itself, turning the strong, creamy page into a brittle, lacy, or just plain pulpy mush. Water is the ultimate destroyer. A single leak in the roof of a monastery, a single flood, can in one afternoon turn a 500-year-old priceless manuscript into a single fused, stinking brick of black-green rot. This is why the high ambas and the dry air of the plateau were a happy accident, or perhaps a divine intervention. That dry, thin air was a better preservative than any army. Historians still argue whether the monks knew this, if they intentionally chose high, dry, airy locations to preserve their books, or if the preservative effect was just a lucky byproduct of their desire for defensive isolation. But let's say the book survives the mold. It's in a dry, safe place. It still has enemies. Now you have to get on your hands and knees. You're looking at the wooden binding, the thick boards of the cover, and you see a tiny, perfectly round hole. It looks like a pinprick. This is the calling card of the bookworm. And no, it's not a metaphor for a dedicated reader. It's a real larval stage insect. It could be the death watch beetle, the furniture beetle, or any number of tiny, hungry grubs. The adult beetle lays its egg on the wood, or in the spine, or even on the page. The larva hatches, and it is hungry. It begins to eat. It will eat the animal hide glue used in the binding. It will eat the wooden boards of the cover, and it will eat the brana pages themselves. And it doesn't just eat one, it tunnels. You might open a book and see that pinprick on the cover, only to find that a bookworm has chewed a perfectly straight, tiny round tunnel through 200 pages, from Genesis to Exodus, leaving a hole of destruction right through the sacred text. And that's just the small enemy. Here's your quirky tidbit. What about the bigger ones? Rats and mice. They are the eternal, non-denominational enemies of all libraries. They aren't interested in the text. They are interested in the glue. The animal and starch-based glues used to hold the bindings together are a delicious high-protein snack. And the piles of Brianna pages stacked in a dark, quiet corner? That's not a library to a rat. That's a high-end, luxury, pre-shredded nesting material. A single rat family could, in one nesting season, shred a lost book of jubilees to make a comfortable bed for its babies, and we would never ever know. Finally, there's the last and most ironic enemy: love. These books were not, for the most part, museum pieces. They were used every day for centuries. They were read in the liturgy. They were chanted from. They were carried in processions. And this wear of constant use is a slow, relentless form of destruction. You're looking at a page again. The bottom right corner. It's not creamy white. It's dark brown, almost black and greasy. It's the thumbprint of centuries. It's the collected skin oil, sweat, and dirt of 1,000 monks, 1,000 Deteras, turning that one page, in that one spot, for 500 years. The page has been loved to death. Look closer. You see a dark, round stain on the text itself. It's not a correction. It's a drop of wax. A Detera, 400 years ago, was reading this by a single candle, leaning in close, and a drop of hot wax fell, permanently sealing a word. The book is full of the physical evidence of its own life. It's covered in the smudges, stains, and loving damage of its readers. This is the Great Quiet War. The Detera finishes his masterpiece, and the battle for survival begins instantly. It's a war against mold, against insects, against rats, and against the very hands that treasure it. You're still at war. You've seen the silent, patient enemies, the mold, the bookworms, the mice, and even the loving, greasy thumbs of the monks themselves. The book is a survivor, a veteran of a centuries-long, quiet campaign. And like any veteran, it wears armor. You're running your fingers over it now. You're touching the binding. It's not the soft, yielding cardboard and paper binding of a modern book. It's hard. It's unyielding. You're touching wood. The covers of these great Ethiopian manuscripts are, in almost all cases, boards of actual wood. Often they're made from a local, dense, insect-resistant wood like Wiram, African olive, or Wanza, Cordia africana. This is the first layer of armor. A bookworm will have a much harder time tunneling through a half-inch of solid hardwood than it will through flimsy papyrus. This wooden board is then covered, usually in tooled leather, often dyed a deep, earthy red. The leather is stretched taut and embossed with designs, almost always a central, elaborate cross. It's a shield, both physically and spiritually, but the real engineering is in the spine. You look at the book's edge. You can see the quires, the little folded groups of Brianna pages, maybe 8 or 10 pages per quire. You can see the thread. This is the mainstream historical fact of the binding, the Coptic-style chain stitch. The Detera didn't just bind the book, he sewed it. He would take 2 quires, lay them on top of each other, and sew through their centerfolds, linking them to each other with a strong, intricate looping chain of thread. Then he'd add the next quire, and the next, and the next, creating a strong, flexible internal spine of pure thread. This sewing was then anchored directly into the wooden boards. There was no glue holding the book block to the cover. The threads themselves were sewn into the wood, making the cover and the pages one single unified object. This book is a tank. It was built for a 500-year service life. Now, you open this armored fortress, you get past the wood, past the leather, and you're back inside looking at the Brianna pages, at the text itself. You're looking for the fingerprints of the scribe, not his thumbprint but his soul print. You're looking for the blemishes. We call them errors. In the sterile digital world, an error is something to be deleted. In the world of manuscripts, an error is a clue. It's a breadcrumb. It's the human being, the Detera, showing through his divine work. Let's say the Detera is copying from an older exemplar text. He's tired, it's late, the candle is low. He's been chanting and writing for 8 hours. His eyes are stinging. He looks up at the original text, reads a line, and then looks down to write it on his new clean page. He reads, "The Son of Man." He looks down and writes, "The Son of Man." He looks back up, but in his fatigue, his eye skips. He's supposed to find the next Son of Man on the page, but his eye lands on a different Son of Man 5 lines further down. He's just skipped 5 entire lines of scripture. This is a classic, common error called homoiotoluton, similar ending. He just cut and pasted, medieval style. Or he's copying, and he gets to the bottom of his new page. He's finished the Brana sheet. He goes to the next one, but he's lost his place. He accidentally rewrites the last 2 sentences from the previous page. This is ditography, writing twice. These aren't sins. They are the inevitable, biological, and human result of a manual copy process. And here's the crucial part. They are the key. This is your quirky tidbit. For a modern textual critic, a blemish is a fingerprint, and it's how you build a family tree. Imagine you find 2 15th century manuscripts of the Gospel of John from 2 different isolated ambas 100 miles apart. You compare them, and you find that they both make the exact same 5-line eye-skip error. They both have the exact same weird misspelled word for Jerusalem. What have you just discovered? You've proven they are related. They are siblings. They must have both been copied from a 3rd older manuscript, maybe a 13th century one, that already had that error. Or one of them was copied directly from the other. You can trace the DNA of the text, not through its perfection but through its flaws. The errors are the genes. Historians still argue whether some of these blemishes are errors at all. What if the Deutera was copying a line, and he just disagreed with it? What if his monastery had a slightly different theological understanding of a passage? He might fix it. He might add a word or change a word, not to make a mistake, but to make it correct, to align it with his sacred tradition. Is that an error, or is that an addition? Is he a copyist, or is he an editor? This is the line that blurs, and it's where the most fascinating discoveries are made. You run your hand over the wooden cover, feeling the deep, embossed cross. You can feel the scratches, the nicks, the tiny pinprick wormholes. You open it and see the Deutera's error, his eye skip, his human fatigue, immortalized in black ink. These aren't blemishes. They are the book's story. They are the evidence of its life, its journey, its humanity. You've seen the armor, the wooden boards, the Coptic chain stitch, the blemishes that tell a human story. You've seen the high-altitude ambas, the rock-hewn churches, the linguistic firewall of Ge'ez, and the astronomical price of a single volume. You're left with an impression of a perfect, impregnable system, a textual sanctuary, a fortress of faith that was never breached. But it was. That's the part of the story that's often missed. The isolation was a defense, but it wasn't a guarantee. The fortress was not perfect. The wars that weren't, the ones in Europe, the ones of theological sanitation, were replaced by wars that were hot, brutal, and aimed directly at the heart of this entire system. The real miracle isn't that the system was built. The real miracle is that anything survived when that system finally, catastrophically failed. You are no longer in the quiet 14th century. You're in the year 1529. The air is not thin and cool. It is thick with smoke, and it is hot with the fire of a new terrifying weapon. You are hearing for the first time in the Highlands the crack of a musket. This is the great mainstream historical fact of Ethiopian devastation, the Ethiopian Adal War. It's an invasion led by a man named Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, the Sultan of the neighboring Adal Sultanate. He is known to the Ethiopians as Ahmad Gure, or Ahmad the Left-Handed, and he is not a local warlord. He is a brilliant general. He is on a mission of holy war, and crucially, he has been supplied by the Ottoman Empire. He has guns. The Ethiopian emperor, with his spears and his cavalry, is fighting a 16th century war. Ahmad Gure has brought the 17th century, and the Ethiopian firearms. A quirky, sad tidbit: the emperor Lebna Dengel had also been given a few cannons by his European Portuguese allies, but his men were so badly trained in using them that, in one of the first major battles, they accidentally fired them at their own troops, causing a rout. It was a total disaster. Ahmad Guri's forces, over 14 years, swept through the highlands like a wildfire. And they were not just conquering, they were erasing. They knew, just as the kings before them knew, that the power of this kingdom was in its books and its monasteries. So they targeted them. They did get up the Ambas. They got to Debris de Mo, that impregnable 6th century monastery on the cliff. They scaled it, they sacked it, and they burned its ancient library. They got to Lalibela. They didn't destroy the rock-hewn churches, you can't really, but they looted them, they desecrated them. They went from monastery to monastery, from Amba to Amba, and they applied the torch. This was the great bonfire that Ethiopia did have. It was a 14-year-long conflagration that destroyed, by some estimates, 80% of the manuscripts in the kingdom. 80%. Think of those phantom libraries you saw in Europe. This was the Ethiopian equivalent, but it happened in just over a decade. So, how did any book survive? How are we even having this conversation? Because the system failed, but the people didn't. The preservation of the texts in this moment of crisis stopped being a system and became a desperate, panicked scramble. As Guri's forces approached, the Dederas and the monks had to make a choice. They couldn't fight, so they ran. You have to picture it. A monk gets word. The army is 3 days away. He runs to the monastery's treasury, the library. He can't take all 50 books. They're too heavy. He can't even take 5. He can take 1, the oldest one, the holiest one, the one that, in his mind, the community cannot survive without. He grabs that 200-goat, 50-pound gospel book, straps it to his back, and he runs. The books survived because they were moved. They weren't in the libraries when the fires came. They were in caves. They were buried in the ground. They were hidden in false walls in remote hermitages. They were carried by fleeing monks into the deepest, most inaccessible valleys. The vault became 1,000 tiny, desperate, unmarked holes in the ground. Historians still argue whether this period was the only great destruction, or just the one we remember. Was Guri's invasion responsible for the loss of so many texts? Or is it a convenient black hole in the historical record that we blame for the absence of texts that may have been lost to mold and mice centuries earlier? It's impossible to know what was in the libraries he burned. What we do know is that the books that survived. They are the 20%, the lucky ones, the ones the monks grabbed. And this creates a survivorship bias of the most profound kind. The books we have today are not a random sample. They are the desert island books, the ones the monks themselves, in a moment of fire and terror, deemed essential. And what did they save? They saved the Gospels. They saved the Psalms. And in this desperate, panicked act of preservation, they also saved a few very, very strange ones. Books that had already been declared lost or heretical by the rest of the world for 1,000 years. You are in a cave, or maybe a small hidden cell in a monastery that was missed by Ahmad Guri's raiding parties. The air smells of dust, dry rock, and old parchment. The monk who fled is with you. He's breathing hard. He's safe, for now. He sets down the heavy leather and wood-bound volume he saved from the fire. He opens it, his hand shaking, just to make sure it's still whole, that the journey didn't damage it. He opens it to the Gospels, kisses the page, and gives thanks. But this volume, this essential book he grabbed, isn't just the Gospels. This is a common practice, a compendium. Bound into the same volume right after the safe books is something else. The script is the same sacred Black-Andrid Ge'ez. The brana is the same costly, time-worn animal skin. The devotion of the Debtera who copied it was just as profound. But the text is one of the most explosive, controversial, and, to the rest of the world, lost books in history. You are, at long last, looking at the Book of Enoch. This is the paradox. This is the payoff. This is the textual ghost in the machine. Here is the mainstream historical fact that you must understand to feel the weight of this moment. The Book of Enoch, or worst Enoch, is an ancient Jewish text. It was not written by Ethiopians. It was written by Jewish scholars, mystics, and apocalyptic writers in the last few centuries before the birth of Christ, what's called the Second Temple period. It was, for a time, wildly popular. It was considered sacred by many early Jewish sects, and the very first Christians, they read it, they loved it, they quoted it. In the New Testament, in the tiny, punchy epistle of Jude, the author quotes directly from the Book of Enoch, calling Enoch, the seventh from Adam, a prophet. This wasn't some obscure text. It was part of the conversation. And then, it was systematically and ruthlessly erased. As Christianity defined itself as it tidied up its theology in those councils you saw in Rome and Constantinople, Enoch became a problem. A big problem. The book contained things. Things that were, to the newly standardized faith, deeply weird. Things about astronomy, about calendars, and most dangerously, a very specific and bizarre story about angels, human women, and the origin of evil. We'll get to that. The Church Fathers, the great content moderators of the 4th and 5th centuries, turned on it. Jerome, the man who translated the Latin Vulgate, declared it apocryphal, not in the modern sense of untrue, but in the ancient sense of hidden, dangerous, and not to be read in public. Origen and Augustine were deeply suspicious of it. It was, in short, placed on the burn list. You saw those fires in section 1. The Book of Enoch was prime fuel. By 500 AD in the entire Roman and Byzantine world, the book was gone. It wasn't just lost, it was culled. It was so effectively purged that, for the next 300 years, the only way European scholars knew it had ever existed was from that one tiny quote in Jude, and a few fragments in Greek, quoted by church fathers, usually so they could write a long, angry paragraph about how wrong it was. The complete text vanished. It died. It was a lost work. Except, you look at the monk. He is chanting the words from the page. He's not hiding it, he's not reading a dangerous book, he is reading scripture. The memo to burn Enoch never got to Ethiopia. The firewall of Ge'ez, the isolation of the Ambus, the schism after the Council of Chalcedon that separated the Coptic and Ethiopian churches from Rome and Constantinople, that quarantine worked. It worked so well that not only did they not burn Enoch, they revered it, they copied it, they studied it, and they canonized it. This is the Enoch paradox. While the book was being hunted to extinction and burned as heresy in Rome, it was being meticulously, lovingly copied, and bound into the official Bible in Ethiopia. It is one of the lost books that makes their 81-book canon so different. Here is your quirky tidbit. For centuries of European scholarship, from the Dark Ages through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the Book of Enoch was a phantom. Scholars debated what it could have been. Then, in 1773, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce, we'll meet him again, returned from his lost years in Ethiopia. He brought back 3 copies. He presented them to the scholars of London and Paris, and they laughed at him. They said he was a fraud. They said he had clearly faked the whole thing, probably written it himself. They were so blinded by their own curated history, so certain that their libraries represented the entire past, that they simply could not accept that a book this important could have been hiding in an uncivilized African kingdom. It was the ultimate academic arrogance. It took decades for them to translate the gaze and realize, with dawning, world-shaking horror, that Bruce was right. Historians still argue whether the Book of Enoch was a foundational text for early Ethiopian Christianity, brought in from Alexandria in the 4th century, or if its canonical status was a later development, championed by specific monastic movements within Ethiopia, to justify their own unique apocalyptic theology. Was it always this important? Or did it rise in popularity precisely because it was so different? You're looking at the page, this impossible survivor. It's a book that, by all rights, should be ash. It's a ghost. It's a refugee from the Great Culling. A book that jumped the firewall of history and found the one single isolated amba where it would be safe. You're holding a text that died and was resurrected 2,300 years later, all because one kingdom missed the memo. You're staring at that page, the impossible page, the textual refugee, the Book of Enoch, and you're starting to read. You re-asking the question that every European scholar who finally accepted its authenticity asked, what's in this book? What's so weird, so dangerous that the entire Roman and Byzantine world felt the need to eradicate it, while this one, isolated kingdom, revered it as holy? You're diving in, and the first thing you read is the Book of the Watchers. This is the mainstream historical fact that forms the core of the book. It's an apocalyptic, mind-bending expansion of a few very strange, very cryptic verses in the Old Testament. You remember them from Genesis 6. It's that one weird pre-flood paragraph that just sits there, unexplained. When man began to multiply on the face of the earth, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And then, that's it. The Bible just moves on. You're left thinking, I'm sorry, what? Sons of God? Giants? What just happened? The Book of Enoch is the story that fills that gaping, bizarre hole. It's the director's cut, and it is wild. Enoch tells you that the sons of God were not men, they were angels. A specific group of 200 high-ranking angels, from the order of the Watchers, and they weren't just watching, they were lusting. Their leader, a high angel named Shemyaza, sees the beauty of human women. He gathers his 199 co-conspirators on the top of Mount Hermon, and he makes them swear a blood oath. We're all going to do this, he says, so that no one chickens out and I don't take the blame alone. It's the first recorded instance of a divinely sanctioned what happens in Vegas road trip. They descend, they come to Earth, they take human wives, and they commit the ultimate, fundamental, cosmological sin. They mix the spiritual with the physical. They break the sacred boundaries of creation, and this is where the real horror begins. The daughters of man become pregnant, but they don't give birth to babies. They give birth to giants, the Nephilim, and these giants, Enoch tells you, are 300 cubits high. That's 450 feet. Let's just assume it's a slight exaggeration or the story is over before it starts. These giants are born with a supernatural raging hunger. They eat all of humanity's food. They eat all the crops, all the livestock. And when that's gone, they turn on the humans. They begin to eat people. And when that's not enough, they turn on each other. And they even begin to eat the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. It is pure cannibalistic, apocalyptic chaos. But wait, it gets worse. Here is your quirky tidbit. The Watchers, the fallen angels, aren't just here to fornicate. They are here to talk. And they are teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, secret things that God had intended to keep from them. This is the origin story of evil in the Enochian tradition. And it's so specific. One angel, Azazel, teaches men the art of metalwork, how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He gives them the knowledge of warfare. And to the women, he teaches them the art of making the eyes beautiful, mascara, eyeliner, how to make jewelry, and how to use precious stones, cosmetics. The book literally blames the fall of civilization on angels teaching people how to make weapons and how to put on makeup. Other angels teach other things, sorcery, incantations, the cutting of roots, pharmacology, potions, and most dangerously, astrology and the signs of the heavens. They are in essence giving humanity a technological and mystical shortcut, all the knowledge that God hadn't wanted them to have. This is the great problem that Enoch's story solves. Historians still argue whether this narrative of forbidden angelic knowledge was an allegory for the dangers of foreign ideas like Greek philosophy, astronomy, and cosmetics, corrupting the pure Jewish faith, or if it was a genuine attempt to solve the problem of evil. Think about it. In the standard Genesis story, where does evil come from? A talking snake, a piece of fruit, and a disobedient human. It's a small domestic drama. But that leaves a big question. If God is all-powerful and all-good, where did this level of profound systemic evil come from? The Book of Enoch gives a different and in some ways more satisfying answer. It's not our fault. Not originally. Yes, humans are sinful, But the source of true, world-breaking, cannibalistic, apocalyptic evil was an alien infection. It was a spiritual plague brought to Earth by a rogue group of divine beings, the Watchers. Their sin and their monstrous giant offspring are what corrupted the Earth so thoroughly that God had no choice but to reboot the entire planet with a flood. This is the cosmology, the strange and vivid backstory that the rest of the world burned, and that Ethiopia preserved. You're reading this, and you realize that for the Dedera in this cave, this is the real story of why the flood happened. It wasn't just people were bad, it was there were 450-foot-tall, people-eating giants, and angels were teaching everyone how to use eyeliner and make swords. It's a much better movie pitch. You've just been floored. You're still reeling from the Book of the Watchers, the 450-foot, cannibalistic giants, the angel who taught cosmetics, the entire, wild and frankly metal backstory to the flood. You're looking at the Dedera, the monk in the cave, and you're thinking, okay, that's it. That has to be the weirdest, most valuable, lost book you have. The monk sees the look on your face. He gives you a small, patient smile. He hasn't closed the compendium. He just turns the page. Because, of course, that's not all he saved. Bound in the same volume, right after the apocalyptic chaos of Enoch, is another text. It's written by a different hand, you can tell. The gaze script is slightly more rounded, but it's just as old, just as sacred, and to the rest of the world it's just as lost. You're looking at the Book of Jubilees. If Enoch was a wild, heavy metal expansion of a single cryptic paragraph, Jubilees is something even more audacious. It's an attempt to fix the entire book of Genesis. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Book of Jubilees is another 2nd century BC Jewish text, a contemporary of Enoch, and it presents itself with a straight face as the true story of Genesis and the first half of Exodus. How? It claims to be a secret second book of Revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai. While God was giving Moses the public law, the 10 Commandments, etc., an angel, the angel of the presence, was dictating this secret history to him, explaining what really happened with Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Jacob. Its nickname among scholars is Little Genesis, but that's a terrible name. It's not little at all. It's a complete top-to-bottom rewrite. Why do it? Because the author of Jubilees was, to put it politely, an obsessive-compulsive perfectionist. He read the original Genesis and he was bothered. It was messy. It was full of gaps. It left too many questions. Where did Cain get his wife? Why did God test Abraham? The timeline is all over the place. So, he fixed it. And his main fix is the one that gives the book its name. He was obsessed with the calendar. He believed, with the fire of a true zealot, that the official Jewish calendar of his day, which was a lunar-based, 354-day calendar, was a pagan corruption. The true, divine, holy calendar, he argued, was a 364-day solar calendar, divided perfectly into 4 seasons of 13 weeks, 91 days each. And this, he said, was the calendar of history. All of history. He took the stories of Genesis and he corrected them, forcing them all to fit into this perfect, rigid timeline. He reorganized all of history into jubilees, periods of 49 years, 7 weeks of 7 years. Everything, from the creation of Adam to the day of Moses on the mountain, happened in a precise, divinely scheduled 49-year block. It's the ultimate life hack for a chaotic history. And this leads to your quirky tidbit, which is just brilliant. The author of Jubilees reads Genesis 22, the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, and he has a massive theological problem. The text says, after these things God tested Abraham. The author of Jubilees puts his pen down. He can't. He just cannot accept that the good, perfect, all-knowing God would wake up one morning and decide to test his most faithful servant by ordering him to murder his own child. It's cruel. It's arbitrary. It's messy. It doesn't fit. So he rewrites it. He invents a new character. In the Book of Jubilees, it's not God's idea. God, in fact, is just minding his own business. The idea comes from a demon. The book introduces you to the chief of the devils, Prince Mastema, a Hebrew name for hostility or enmity. Mastema, who is essentially this book's version of Satan, comes to God and taunts him. He says, "You see that, Abraham? You think he loves you? He doesn't. He only loves that son of his, Isaac. You're nothing to him. Go on. Test him. You'll see." I'm right. And then God, tested himself by this demon, allows the test to proceed. This is a breathtaking change. The author of Jubilees was so uncomfortable with the moral ambiguity of his own sacred text that he invented a devil to take the blame. It is, quite literally, the first ever example of the devil made me do it but applied to God himself. This is what Jubilees does. It cleans up the messy, complex, and psychologically profound stories of Genesis and turns them into a rigid, morally unambiguous, and perfectly scheduled rulebook. And, just like Enoch, Jubilees was purged. The standardized rabbinic Judaism that emerged after the fall of the temple in 70 AD had no time for this. They rejected its weird calendar and its fan fiction rewrites, and the Christian churches in Rome and Constantinople, following their lead, declared it apocryphal, and so it was burned. It vanished. For over 1,000 years, Jubilees was gone. We had a few fragments in Greek, a partial summary in Latin. The full, complete text? It was a ghost. Until, of course, James Bruce and the other explorers brought back the Ge'ez. The Deutera in the cave, just like with Enoch, doesn't know this is a lost book. He doesn't know it's heresy. To him, this is the story of Genesis. It's the real story, the one the angel told Moses. Historians still argue whether Jubilees and Enoch were written by the same radical apocalyptic calendar-obsessed Jewish sect, or if they were rival schools of thought, both trying to fix a faith they felt was being corrupted. But the Ethiopian church? It didn't care about that debate. It just saw the books, loved the stories, and kept them. You're looking at the Brana page, at the story of Prince Mastema, and you realize you're now holding two ghosts. Two books that died everywhere else, preserved in this one ark. You're starting to wonder, what else is in their Bible? You're holding those two ghosts, Enoch and Jubilees. You're looking at the Deutera in the cave, and you're finally, fully understanding. This isn't just a library that saved a few curiosities. This is an alternate library. This is a parallel stream of history. This is what the past looks like when you don't have the bonfire. And that question you had, what else is in their Bible? It's the right question. Because it's not just these two. The monk, seeing your curiosity, gestures to the other volumes he stacked in this tiny, dry cave, the essential books he saved from the fire. And you realize, this is the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church's biblical canon. This is the mainstream historical fact, and it's a number. In the West, a Protestant Bible has 66 books. A Roman Catholic Bible has 73 books. They include the Apocrypha, or deuterocanonical books that Protestants left out. Even the Eastern Orthodox churches, which have a slightly larger canon, tend to top out around 76. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, they have 81. It's the largest, most comprehensive, and to the rest of the world, strangest biblical canon on the planet. And now you have to ask why. Why 81? The simple answer, the one you've been seeing for the last 18 sections, is isolation. It's the Kebra Nagast logic. It's the Amba fortress. It's the Ge'ez firewall. When the rest of the Christian world was having its great, messy political and often violent canon debates, the councils and synods in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries that were, in essence, giant meetings to decide what's in and what's out and what to burn, Ethiopia was not invited. They were cut off. They were behind the wall, running their own parallel version of the faith, connected only to Alexandria, which also had a flexible view of Scripture. They never had their great culling. They never had a purge. They didn't lose books, so they didn't have to cut books. Their mindset wasn't, what should we remove? It was, what else did God give us? But here is the scholarly debate part, and it's a good one. That number, 81, it's a bit of a moving target. Historians still argue whether the 81-book canon is a fixed, literal list or a symbolic theological number. Why 81? Well, 81 is 999, or 3x3x3. It's a perfect number, a number of divine completion, a number that feels holy. Because when you actually ask an Ethiopian scholar, okay, show me the list of 81, you will often get a few different lists. There's a broader canon and a narrower canon. Both are still called 81 books, which is confusing, but just go with it. The narrower canon is the one more commonly used in public worship. It's still bigger than a Catholic Bible. The broader canon is the one used by scholars and monks, the one kept in the monasteries, the one that represents the full deposit of the faith. And this is where you find the ghosts. This broader canon is the one that officially includes Wern Enoch. It's the one that includes the Book of Jubilees. And here's your quirky tidbit. What else is in there? How do you get from 73 to 81? Oh, let me tell you. You include books like the books of Maccabean, specifically 1, 2, and 3. You've heard of the Maccabees, right? The story of the Jewish revolt, the basis for Hanukkah? Well, these are not those. These are completely different books with a similar name, about a different group of Jewish martyrs, with a different, much more philosophical theology. You include the Epistle of Clement, a letter from the Bishop of Rome to the Corinthians, which the rest of the church considered important, but not Bible. Ethiopia? Looks like scripture to us. Put it in. You include a text called the Book of the Covenant, Mashafa Kidan, a discourse of Jesus to his disciples after the resurrection, full of new teachings which no one else has. You're looking at this collection, this 81-book question, and you realize the truth. Canon is just a fancy word for the list of books our ancestors didn't burn. And Ethiopia's burn list was, effectively, empty. They were not collecting heresy. They were preserving in their minds the entire original, unculled, uncurated, unsanitized inheritance of the very, very earliest Jewish and Christian faith. They weren't wrong. They just finished the collection. They're the ultimate completists. And now you're starting to wonder, if they kept all this, all the biblical stuff, what about the non-biblical stuff? What other texts that weren't even pretending to be scripture did they save from the fire? The 81-book canon? You're still trying to wrap your head around it. This vast alternate reality Bible with its giants, its demon-blaming rewrites, and its extra epistles. You're looking at the Deutera's collection in this cave, and you're thinking, okay, that's the official library, but you're in a monastery. You're in a culture of total obsessive preservation. Do you really think they only copied the Bible? The canon is just the sacred shelf. But the library, the real library, the one that represents the entire mind of this highland kingdom, that's everything else. The Deutera sees you're still curious. He reaches for a different stack of books. These are not canon. These are the books that made life work. You're now peeking beyond the canon into the rest of the intellectual and spiritual hard drive that Ethiopia preserved. And the first and largest folder you find is labeled Hagiography. This is your mainstream historical fact, the Gadol, pronounced Gedla. A Gadol is a life of a saint, and Ethiopian literature has thousands of them. For every one Bible, a monastery might have 50 Gadol. This was the real popular literature. You open one. It's the Gedla Tekle Haymanot, the life of Saint Tekle Haymanot, one of Ethiopia's most beloved national saints. You're expecting a quiet, pious biography. He was born, he prayed, he was nice, he died. You are so wrong. What you're reading is a superhero origin story. It's a fantasy epic. It's an adventure novel. You read that Tekle Haymanot, on one of his journeys, comes to a cliff. There's a 60-foot drop. How does he get down? He doesn't. A python comes, bows to him, and lets the saint use him as a living rope to climb down. Later, the saint fights a demon, who has taken the form of a giant evil crow. This is what the Gedel are. They are a fusion of history, theology, and pure, uncut spectacle. And they served a purpose. They were a political tool. If your monastery was founded by a saint who could ride a python, you're clearly more important than the monastery in the next valley. They were a theological tool. The saint's sermons in the book would reinforce the Tewahedo faith. And they were just a great story. This brings you to your quirky tidbit. The Gedla Tekla Haymanot isn't even the most extreme one. You get to the part of his life where, as an act of penance, he decides to pray standing. He stands for 22 years. He stands on one leg. He stands for so long praying in his cave that his leg, from gangrene and wear, just falls off. And what does God do? God, impressed by this frankly terrifying act of devotion, gives him 6 wings, like a seraph. The rest of his life is depicted in paintings with him as a one-legged, 6-winged old man. This is what was being saved. This holy fan fiction, these epic, wild, supernatural stories of the local saints were just as precious and just as meticulously copied as the Gospels. But it's not all superhero stories. The Detera shows you something else. It's not a book. It's a chart. A complex circular hand-drawn diagram. It's an auta negist, a circle of kings. It's an astrological and calendrical text, a complex calculator used to determine auspicious and inauspicious days for planting, for traveling, for going to war, for pretty much anything. It's a farmer's almanac, a king's strategic planner, and a doctor's diagnostic tool all in one. And that opens the next folder: medicine and magic. You see, to the Detera, these were not separate categories. Faith, medicine, and magic were all part of the same toolkit for navigating a dangerous world. And this is where historians still argue whether the Detera's role as a magician was a pure part of the Tewahedo faith, or a syncretic blending of Christianity with the older pre-Christian folk religions of the highlands. The answer is yes. The Detera shows you the really secret stuff. Not a 50-pound book, but a scroll. A tiny, tightly rolled personal amulet scroll. A villager, afraid of a demon, or the evil eye, Buddha, or a specific sickness, would come to the Detera. The Detera would take a long, thin strip of brana, parchment, cut to the exact height of the person, and he would create a mestafa sebel, a protective text. On this scroll he would write, in sacred Ge'ez, the names of God. He would write prayers to angels and saints to trample the demon. He would quote scripture. And then, he would draw talismans. He would draw complex geometric knots. He would draw images of angels with swords. He would draw the eyes of God, a series of interlocking, staring eyes to reflect the evil eye. He would sometimes even write magic squares with numbers or secret angelic names in a code. This wasn't heresy. This was applied faith. This was a personal, wearable, divine security system. The person would take this scroll, which was as tall as they were, roll it up, put it in a leather case, and wear it around their neck for the rest of their life. The Ark of Ethiopia didn't just save the high theology of Enoch. It saved the entire operating system of the culture. Its epic hagiographies, its star charts, its medical guides, and its personal, wearable, demon-fighting magic scrolls. It saved everything. You're surrounded by this entire alternate universe of texts. The 81-book canon, the superhero saints on their python ropes, the demon-fighting amulet scrolls. This is the complete, sealed, and self-contained intellectual world of the Highland Ark. It's a system that has been running in parallel to the rest of the world for over 1,000 years, protected by its mountains, its language, and its profound, unshakable belief in its own divine mission. The firewall held. The isolation was, for 300 years, a total success. And then, the Ferengi arrived. You're no longer in the 16th century, fleeing from Ahmad Gure. You've jumped forward to the 1760s. This is the peak of the European Enlightenment. The air smells of coffee, wig powder, and a burning, arrogant curiosity. This is an age of reason, of science, of knowing. London, Paris, and Berlin are the centers of the world, and their scholars are busy mapping, categorizing, and explaining every corner of the globe. Africa, to them, is the dark continent, a void, a place of savages and blank spaces. And the greatest blank space on the entire map? The source of the Nile. This question is the 18th century's moonshot. Where does this godlike river, the river of the pharaohs, the river of Moses, begin? To find its sources to solve the greatest geographical mystery on Earth. Enter James Bruce of Kinnaird. You need to picture this man. He is not a dusty, quiet academic. He is a 6'4", red-headed, boisterous, and utterly fearless Scottish laird. He's a proto-Indiana Jones. He's a polymath who speaks a dozen languages, a brilliant astronomer, a trained physician, and an expert horseman. He is, in short, one of the most magnificent and insufferable main characters of the 18th century, and he has decided that he is the man who will find the source of the Nile. After years of adventuring, he finally gets his inn. He lands on the Red Sea coast, and in 1769 begins the perilous year-long trek up into the Ethiopian highlands. The same highlands that Prester John was rumored to rule, the same highlands that had been sealed off since the time of Ahmad Gure. He arrives, not as a conqueror, but as a scholar, and, crucially, as a doctor. The royal court at Gondar is, as it often was, in the middle of a civil war and a smallpox epidemic. Bruce, with his imposing size, his absolute confidence, and his modern, for 1770 medical kit, walks into the court, saves the lives of several of the royal children, and instantly makes himself indispensable. He's in. He is now a high-ranking, trusted member of the Ethiopian court, and he's a scholar. He's not just looking for a river, he's looking. He's listening. He sees the Ambas. He talks to the Dateras. And they, seeing him as a friend of the king, open the libraries. He is the first European scholar, the first outsider, to get a comprehensive look inside the Ark. And he sees it. He sees the Kebra Nagast and understands the Solomonic claim. He sees the 81-book canon. He sees the Gadla, the lives of the saints. And yes, he finds the Book of Enoch. He finds the Book of Jubilees. He finds the texts that his entire enlightened world had declared lost, heretical, or fictional for 1,400 years. This is the mainstream historical fact. Bruce spends years in Ethiopia, finds what he believes is the source of the Blue Nile, at Lake Tana, and after a harrowing, impossible escape, he makes it back to Europe in 1773. He arrives in London and Paris, walks into the royal societies, and they laugh in his face. They don't just disagree with him. They viciously mock him. They call him an abject, pathological liar. He tells them about the Kebra Nagast. They laugh. He tells them he found the Book of Enoch, the one quoted in the Bible. They laugh harder. They say he's a fraud, that he must have faked it or written it himself. And here is your quirky tidbit. Of all the things he told them, the lie that truly proved he was a fantasist, the detail that made polite 18th century society recoil in disbelief, was not the 450-foot giants in Enoch. It was Brindo, the Ethiopian custom of eating raw meat. Bruce, in his travelogue, described in graphic detail the banquets where raw beef, still quivering, was carved from the animal and eaten. To the powdered, wig-wearing, civilized gentleman of London, this was the bridge too far. It was barbaric. It was savage. It was impossible. And if he was lying about the food, he was clearly lying about the books. It took decades, long after Bruce died, heartbroken and ridiculed, for other scholars to finally, painstakingly translate the 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch that he had brought back. And as they did, a dawning, world-shaking realization set in. He was right. About Enoch. About Jubilees. About the Kebra Nagast. About all of it. Historians still argue whether Bruce was a discoverer or the world's most high-profile thief. He acquired these priceless ancient manuscripts, bought them, was given them, rescued them. The line is blurry. Was he a scholar preserving lost knowledge, or was he the first wave of colonial intellectual extraction? A Ferengi who had finally, irrevocably, broken the firewall. Either way, the isolation was over. The Ark had been breached, the lost library had been found, and now, every other power in Europe knew it was there, and they too wanted a copy. James Bruce was right, and now everyone knows it. The firewall is broken. The Ferengi has been inside the Ark, and he's come back out with his arms full of ghosts. He has proved that the greatest textual treasures on Earth, books that the civilized world had declared dead for 1,400 years, were just sitting on a shelf in a mountain fortress in Africa. The isolation is over, and the rest of Europe, the great colonial powers of the 19th century, are curious. And when a 19th century colonial power gets curious, you'd be wise to lock up your history. You're in the 1860s now. This is the absolute high noon peak of the scramble for Africa. This is the era of the white man's burden, the deeply, arrogantly held belief that it is Europe's divine, civilizing mission to rescue the rest of the world from itself. And rescuing in this context has a very specific and very acquisitive meaning. You're on the march. You're part of a British military expedition, 13,000 soldiers strong, marching into the Ethiopian highlands. This is the Magdala expedition of 1868. This is your mainstream historical fact, and it is the single most devastating moment in the history of the Ethiopian arc. The story is this. The Ethiopian emperor, Tewodros II, was a unifier, a modernizer, and also erratic. He was a brilliant, tragic, and by the end, deeply paranoid figure. He got into a diplomatic spat with the British government, felt he was being ignored, and, in a move of profound miscalculation, he took a handful of British missionaries and diplomats hostage. He wasn't trying to harm them. He was trying to get attention. He was trying to get the British, his fellow Christians, to send him skilled artisans to help him modernize his kingdom. Instead, he got an army. Sir Robert Napier, at the head of a massive, perfectly engineered expeditionary force, lands on the coast and marches 400 miles into the highland interior, building a railroad as they go to rescue the hostages. They arrive at Tewodros's mountain fortress, his Amba, Magdala. A battle is fought. Tewodros, with his homemade mortars and his spearmen, is catastrophically defeated by the modern artillery and rifles of the British. As the British forces storm his fortress, Emperor Tewodros, seeing that all is lost, takes a pistol, a gift in a moment of bitter irony from Queen Victoria, and he takes his own life. The hostages are rescued. The mission is technically over. And then, the preservation begins. This is not a chaotic, drunken sacking. This is a cold, systematic, scholarly act of plunder. The British Army, in a prize committee, decides to indemnify itself for the cost of the expedition. They gather all of Tewodros's royal possessions, everything in his fortress, and they hold an auction. But the real treasure wasn't the gold. It was the library. With the army, not by accident but on purpose, is a man named Richard Holmes. He is not a soldier. He is a curator of manuscripts from the British Museum. He is an expert. He is, in effect, an acquisitions specialist with a military escort. He walks into Tewodros's library, the same kind of library you've been in, full of those 200 goat, kingly, priceless volumes, and he selects. He preserves. He rescues the finest, the oldest, the most beautifully illuminated, the most historically priceless manuscripts. They don't just take a few. They take everything. They bring in 15 elephants and 200 mules to carry the loot, hundreds and hundreds of priceless ancient manuscripts. They take the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings, the very book that defines the Ethiopian monarchy. They take illuminated gospels that are 1,000 years old. They take crowns, royal robes, and sacred tablets from the church. Here's your quirky tidbit, if quirky is the word for soul-crushing. Among the items selected by Holmes for the British Museum is a 10th century manuscript, one of the oldest, of Wern Enoch. The very ghost that Bruce had discovered, the book that Ethiopia alone had saved, was now being saved from Ethiopia. The justification was that these priceless artifacts were safer in London, in the care of a civilized nation, than they were here, where they were subject to local wars and fires. The irony, of course, is that the only fire that had ever truly threatened these books was the one the British were currently setting to the fortress as they left. This is the legacy of loot. The ark was breached and then it was plundered. Historians still argue whether this cultural extraction was a well-intentioned, if paternalistic, act of 19th century preservation. They did save them from the fire they were setting. Or a cynical, calculated act of imperial plundering, designed to strip a defeated rival of its cultural and spiritual identity. It's not an argument to the Ethiopians. It was and is theft. Today, if you want to see the best examples of Ethiopia's textual heritage, you have to go to London, or Paris, or Berlin, or the Vatican. The ghosts were captured. They were preserved, yes. But they were preserved in exile as trophies on a shelf in a foreign land, a testament not to their survival, but to their capture. You're standing in a room. It's not a cave, it's not an amba. It's a clean, climate-controlled, low-light gallery. You're probably in London or Paris. You are in the British Library or the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And there, under a thick pane of non-glare, UV filtering glass, is one of the ghosts. It's one of the Magdala manuscripts, a 10th century gospel, illuminated with a stunning, vibrant portrait of St. Luke. It is perfect. It is safe. It is dead. It's flat. It's open to one unmoving page. It is no longer a book. It is a specimen. It is an artifact, a trophy, preserved in its exile, its spiritual and cultural life snuffed out in the name of keeping it safe. This is the legacy of that 19th century rescue. But what about the books that weren't stolen? What about the 80% that survived Guri's fires, the ones that weren't at Magdala, the ones that are still in Ethiopia, in those high, dry monasteries? You are back in the highlands. You're on an amba, in the storehouse, the ikabet, of a 14th century monastery. The old monk, the Abba, the guardian, opens a wooden chest. The smell of old parchment, dry wood, and incense washes over you. He pulls out a book. It's a Gadol, a life of a saint. It's 500 years old, and it is dying. It is dying a slow, quiet, natural death. Remember those enemies? The mold, the insects, the wear of constant use? They never stopped. You look at the page. The brana is getting brittle. The edges are crumbling into brown dust. A tiny wormhole has, over the last 200 years, become a tiny channel. The ink, 500 years old, is fading. The book is an old man, and his life is coming to an end. This is the new crisis. The old one was fire. The new one is time. The ark is leaking. The manuscripts that survived the bonfires, the invasions, and the looters are now facing their final, inescapable enemy, entropy. What do? You can't put a 1,000-year-old monastery on an amba under glass. These are not museums. They are living houses of faith. Enter the new debtora. He doesn't carry a reed pen. He carries a laptop. You're in that same monastery, but now a new team is here. This is the digital monastery. This is the mainstream historical fact of the modern-day race, the work of organizations like the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, HMML, the British Library's Endangered Archives Program, and the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church's own Patriarchate Library. This is the new preservation. It's the 21st century amba. You watch the process. A technician, often an Ethiopian scholar trained in this new craft, is setting up a digital scriptorium. It's not a desk. It's a padded, V-shaped cradle to hold the ancient, fragile book without breaking its spine. Above it is not a candle, but an articulated arm holding a high-resolution digital camera. There's a laptop, 2 soft, cool-burning lights, and a color correction card. The old Abba, the monk, brings the 500-year-old dying book. He places it on the cradle. He, or the technician, turns a page. There is a soft clicking sound, a flash of light. The page, the ink, the brana, the water stains, the thumb smudges, the wormholes, the entire history, is captured in a 100 megabyte file. This is the new brana. This is the new ink. Here's your quirky tidbit. The challenges are not technical. They are human. You're a Western-funded academic team. You show up at a monastery that hasn't seen a Ferengi since, well, they remember Magdala. And you say, "Hi, we're from a university in America or England. We're here to take pictures of your most priceless sacred treasures for preservation." Just like Richard Holmes. The Abba points to the rope. The "get the hell out of here" is implied. The entire project is not about cameras. It's about trust. It's about spending weeks, months, years drinking coffee with the monks, praying with them, showing them that this is not theft. This is a copy. The book never leaves. And the copy, the digital file, is theirs. A copy is given to the monastery. A copy is given to the patriarch in Addis Ababa. And only with their permission is a third copy taken back to the digital amba. the secure servers at HMML or elsewhere for safekeeping and study. Historians and librarians now argue whether this digital preservation is the final, perfect solution, or a new kind of extraction. Who owns this digital heritage? What happens when the server fails or the file format becomes obsolete in 100 years? Is a digital copy a JPEG, a book, or is it a ghost of a ghost? But here, in this monastery, the click of the camera is a sound of hope. It's an act of defiance against time, against mold, against the worm. It's the 21st century version of the Debtor's prayer. The book is captured. It is safe. But more than that, it is free. For the first time, a scholar in Tokyo, a student in Ohio, and a young debtor in a different ambi 500 miles away can all look at this same page. The digital monastery is a library with no walls, no amba, and crucially no rope. It is preservation. But it is also, finally, liberation. The click of the camera echoes in the stone room. It's a sound of preservation, a sound of liberation. A digital ghost has been born, a perfect, weightless, and immortal copy of the 500-year-old book. That digital ghost is now safe on a server, an amba in the cloud. It's a backup. It's an insurance policy. It's a miracle of the modern age. But it's not the book. The old Abba, the monk, gives a respectful nod to the technicians. He then, with a reverence that is almost painful to watch, closes the heavy wooden board cover of the original. He lifts the 50-pound, 500-goat gaddle, and he places it back in its chest. The technicians pack their cameras. They will go back to their university. Their digital copy will be studied by scholars for the next 100 years. And next Sunday, the Abba will take that book out again and use it. This is the final, most important piece of the puzzle. You're in a city now, maybe Gondar or Aksum or Addis Ababa. It's Sunday morning just before dawn. Or maybe it's Fasika, Easter. The air is cold, but it's vibrating. You're standing in the dark outside one of the great round Tewahedo churches. The church itself is packed, 1,000 people standing, and the sound is rolling out, washing over you. It's not a sermon, it's a sound. It's the sound of the Kedase, the divine liturgy. And it is being chanted, as it has been for 1,700 years, in Ge'ez. This is the mainstream historical fact. These books are not relics. They are not in storage. They are the living, breathing, functional hardware of the Tewahedo faith. That digital copy is a ghost. The Brana book is the body. You're hearing the Depteras. Remember them? The scribes, the scholars, the magicians? They are here. They are not a lost class of men. They are standing in the choir, in their white shamas, robes, and they are leading this. You hear the deep, booming thump, thump, thump of the kebero, the tall, skin-covered church drum. It's a heartbeat, a bass line for the soul. And then you hear this sound, a high-pitched, metallic, shaking rhythm. It's the sistrum. The priest is holding a wooden-framed rattle, a series of metal discs on rods, and he is shaking it in a complex, driving rhythm. Here is your quirky and frankly mind-blowing tidbit. That sistrum, it's not just old. It is ancient. It's not just Ethiopian. If you go to a museum of Egyptology, if you look at a 4,000-year-old painting on a tomb wall in the Valley of the Kings, you will see the exact same instrument. You will see an ancient Egyptian priestess of Isis, or Hathor, holding a sistrum in the exact same way. This is not a medieval church. This is an ancient church. The sound you are hearing, the sheesh shake of that sistrum, is a piece of liturgical hardware, a sound that has been continuously used in worship on the African continent, in this same river valley, for 4,000 years. It is a sound that Moses would have recognized. The priest, in his full, spectacular robes of colored velvet and gold thread, now comes forward. He is holding the book, not a paperback, not a modern Amharic printed copy. He is holding the Gara Gospel, a 300-year-old, 40-pound, wooden-boarded Brana manuscript, the very one you saw being digitized. He holds it up. He kisses it. He chants the gospel for the day, in the ejective, popping, sacred sounds of Ge'ez. And the people, they don't understand the words. Not intellectually. It's like you, listening to a Latin high mass. You don't get the grammar, but you understand the holiness. You understand the meaning. This is the central debate. Historians and theologians still argue whether this unwavering, 1,700-year-old commitment to Ge'ez is the ultimate act of perfect preservation, or a barrier to the faith. Is it a mystical experience, where the unintelligible sound is the holiness? Or does it create a barrier, a mystery that separates the people from a text they cannot understand, reinforcing the power of the Deutera, the only ones who can read it? But as you stand there in the dark, and the smell of the etan, the frankincense, the same frankincense that Aksum traded with Rome, washes over you, and the Kebero drum is vibrating in your chest, and the 4,000-year-old shake of the sistrum is in your ears, you realize the answer doesn't matter. The book is not a text, it is a participant, it is an actor, it is the guest of honor. The digital copy is for information. This book, this is for power. It is a living, working, sacred tool, and its job is not over. Its job is now. You're standing in that church, the sound of the 4,000-year-old sistrum filling your ears. The Abba, the priest, is holding that ancient 40-pound Brana gospel. He is chanting. The sound is the Ge'ez, the heartbeat is the Kebero drum. This is the living word. This is not a reenactment. This is not a heritage day. This is the unbroken, continuous now, and you're looking at the Abba. His face is lined, his eyes are focused on the red and black text. He is the keeper. He is the man at the end of the line. Or, is he? You're not just looking at one man. You are seeing a chain, a human chain, stretching back, hand to hand, from this dark, incense-filled church, all the way back to that 4th century port city of Adulis. This Abba, this keeper. He is the spiritual and professional great-great-great-great-grandson of the Deutera, who in 1530 grabbed this very book, strapped it to his back, and ran from the fires of Ahmad Gure, hiding it in a cave. He is performing the exact same liturgy that monk was performing with the exact same book, and that monk in turn. He was the descendant of the Deutera in the 13th century who made this book, the one who sat for a year, his hand cramping, his reed pen flying, patiently painting the Ge'ez script, funded by a king, praying as he worked. And that scribe. He was the descendant of the monks who, in the 12th century, carved Lalibela from the earth, who built a fortress of invisibility to protect this very liturgy. And those monks, they were the descendants of the Deutera in the 6th century, who climbed the rope to Debre Damo, the Amba, the geological safe, carrying with them the first copies of Enoch and Jubilees. And they were the descendants of Frumentius himself, the Syrian boy, shipwrecked and enslaved, who became the father of peace, who brought the faith from Alexandria, and who set this entire 1,700-year-long project of preservation into motion. This is the unbroken chain. This is the mainstream historical fact of the apostolic succession of the Tewahedo Church. The Abba in front of you was ordained by a bishop who was ordained by a bishop who, they believe, was ordained in a line stretching back to Frumentius, who was ordained by Athanasius, who was part of a line that, they believe, went back to the apostles themselves. It is a physical chain. This is the final duty. It's not just to guard the books. It's to guard the chain. It's to be the chain. Here is your quirky tidbit. How is the chain made? How do you make a new Deutera? In the exact same way you did 1,000 years ago. It is, perhaps, the last true medieval apprenticeship on Earth. A young boy in a village, maybe 7 or 8 years old, shows a good voice or a quick mind. He is sent to the local church school. His education begins. And what is his first book? He doesn't get a book. He gets memory. His first task is to memorize by heart the entire book of Psalms. In Ge'ez. He can't read yet. He just learns the sound. Then, he learns the 150-plus hymns of St. Yared, the complex, beautiful, and ancient music of the liturgy, the Zima. Only after his mind and his voice are filled with the sound of the sacred is he finally taught the script. He is taught to read and write the Ge'ez cipher, the one that has acted as a firewall for 1700 years. This is the keeper's final duty. It's not to put the book under glass, it's not even to make a digital copy. Those are acts of preservation. The keeper's duty is an act of transmission. It is to take the entire living, complex, messy ecosystem, the book, the sound, the drum, the sistrum, the incense, the 4,000-year-old rattle, the 450-foot giants, and pass it, whole and alive, to the next generation. Historians and theologians still argue whether this is history at all. Is this keeping history alive, or is it living in history, in a way that the rest of the world has forgotten? Is this a museum, or is it a time machine? The Abba in front of you, he's destroying the book. Just a little. Every time he turns the page, his thumb, greasy with the oil of his skin and the smoke of the incense, adds one more microscopic layer of loving damage to that 500-year-old Brianna page. He is loving it to death. And this is the final, beautiful paradox. The preservation of the specimen in the British Museum under glass is what kills it as a holy object. The use of this book, in this church, is what preserves it as a holy object. Even as that use slowly, patiently, lovingly, turns it to dust. The keeper's duty is not to save the book from death, or his duty is to make sure the book lives a full, sacred, and useful life, right up until the moment it dies. And by then, he has ensured that a new 7-year-old boy is already learning the Psalms, and a new Dedera is already scraping a new goat's skin to make its replacement. The book is just the baton. The chain is the race, and so the sound of the sistrum softens, that 4,000-year-old shake fading as the Kedese comes to an end, and the first, thin gray light of dawn begins to touch the windows of the church. The Kebero drum is silent. The Brana book, its sacred duty done for one more day, is closed, its wooden covers coming together with a soft final thud. The air is still thick with the frankincense, that ancient smell of the Red Sea trade, the smell of Axum in Rome, the smell of the Magi. You're walking out of the church, into the cool, thin morning air of the highlands. You're on the roof of Africa, but you've been somewhere else entirely. You've been inside the ark. You've touched the ghosts. You've seen the chain, the fire, the culling, the bonfire of the medieval world. It was real. The smell of burning knowledge was the default setting for 1,000 years. But that smell, it never made it up the rope. It never got past the Gaia's firewall. It never sank into the stone of Lalibela. Here something else survived. Not just the books, not just the giants and the calendars and the magic scrolls. What survived was the duty, the unbroken human 1,700-year-long promise from one hand to the next, to keep the word alive. It's safe. The keepers are still on watch.